Everybody be seated. Mr. Segura, you may resume the witness stand. Ms. Dugan.
So you told police in your interviews with police that you and Brandy weren't fighting or arguing about child support, and you told them that she was really sweet, didn't you?
Yes,
Okay.
she is sweet.
But isn't it true that she was taunting you? She was telling you that you were stupid for thinking that Javante was actually your son.
Yes, she told me that.
Okay. She told you that on numerous occasions, didn't she?
Yes.
And then she'd come back and say, no, he is your son, and then no, he's not. It was kind of like a little mind game she'd play back and forth.
Yes.
And you told police in your second interview that you and Miss Peters never had an argument about child support. The questions that you're being asked are in orange and your statements are in yellow. They ask, tell me about the argument that you and Brandy had about child support. The argument we had about child support, you said? We didn't have an argument about child support. Apparently, she's telling people you did. You say, no, we never had an argument about child support. You said that, didn't you?
Yes.
That's not true, is it?
Of course not. No, it's not true.
In reality, she was actually threatening to have you thrown in jail for not paying child support for Javante,
Yes.
wasn't she?
Plenty of times, yes.
And she was actually doing that just 3 days before she was murdered, right?
She was doing it, yes. Probably. I don't remember the exact time, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it was leading up until the time that everything happened.
I'm going to show you a copy of some of these text messages. You just want to look at the dates on those and let me know once you're finished.
What's the dates? I'm just looking at the highlighted dates, or just
Yeah, just these messages about putting you in jail.
Oh. Yeah, all on the 16th.
Okay.
The 16th.
And so that was 3 days before she was murdered?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I couldn't hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
And so Brandy Peters, she was telling you that Javante was not your son. You were stupid for ever even thinking that. And then, on the other hand, at the same time, she's trying to put you in jail for not paying child support for a child that she's telling you isn't even yours, right?
Right.
It's not very sweet, is it?
At the time, no, it wasn't.
Okay. And when you lived with Brandy and her children, obviously that was some years ago, before Javante was born and right after his birth, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was when they were living over on Holton Street, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And in your interviews with police, you said at the time that you hadn't seen Javante and Brandy in months, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it had been a long time since you saw the twins.
Yes.
In your interviews with police, you acted like child support wasn't really any big deal to you.
It's really not.
There wasn't many issues with that.
It wasn't a big deal to me. It was issues with it, but it wasn't a big deal.
All right, and you told them actually that you said, I put myself on child support.
Yes.
It was another reason to stop contact with Brandy. You didn't want to have any dealings with her, right?
It's not that I didn't want to have any dealings with her, but me having dealings with her was kind of bad for my marriage. So I was trying to stop having dealings with her.
Okay, so you're saying that you wanted to go put yourself on child support to pay for this child that she was telling you were stupid for thinking was yours.
That way I can stop going over bringing her money orders and stuff. Every time I go over bring her money order, we end up having sex. So it's always back and forth.
Okay, so you're saying that this whole time instead of paying child support so that they wouldn't take any action against you, the state, instead you're kind of paying her behind the scenes, you're giving her these money orders, paying for Pampers, things like that?
No, this was all before I put myself on child support.
Okay, so your story is still that you put yourself on child support to pay for Javante, who she told you wasn't yours.
It's not a story, it's a fact.
Okay. And you'd actually, we learned that you owed over $20,000 in child support, and you did not have the money to pay that, did you?
Of course not.
All right. And in fact, the week of the murders, you only had $106 in your bank account, didn't you?
I really don't remember what I had in my bank account.
Well, I'm going to show you what I've marked and has previously been shown to the defense as State's Exhibit 151. State's Exhibit 151 is a copy of, or a document showing that your available balance in your Bank of America account is $106.59, right?
You say after I withdrew $1,450?
Right. That was your
Right.
current balance as of November 18th?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're telling police, it was no big deal, I just wanted to get a paternity test for $300, at that point, you didn't have $300, you had $106, didn't you?
Of course I had more than $106. I just took out $1,400. Where do you think I got money from to go to my next job out of town? You think I went with $106?
Well, that's what
it costs more than $100 to put gas in your vehicle and pay for a hotel.
Well, that's what you were saying. You're saying money really wasn't that big of a deal, that you were just planning to pay the child support. You could just pay a little bit and get everybody off your back, right?
Right, and you're saying that all I had was $106 in my name. That's very inaccurate according to the $1,455 I withdrew.
Well, I'm sure you had rent, you had other child support, you had a lot of things you were trying to pay. But I'm saying on this date, that was my question to you, that you had $106 in your account.
Yeah, in the account,
And
yes.
this was the day before the murders, right?
Well, I didn't even look at the date. I looked at how much it was. But regardless, yes, it was $106 in the account.
That was your available balance the day before these murders?
Right.
Okay. And if you could just get Department of Revenue off your back by paying a little bit, you would have, wouldn't you?
That's all I had to do was pay them some money, and yeah.
But you didn't pay them any money. You didn't pay them any money in August, did you?
No.
You didn't pay them any money in September?
No.
Or October?
No.
Or November?
No.
Right? And then after November, you didn't have to pay any money anymore, right?
Unfortunately, no.
And, but you're telling us that you thought you were just going to put it off and pay a little bit at some point in the future, maybe after they'd already put a lien on your property, suspended your license, put you in jail.
No, I was going to make payments way before they done any of that.
But your testimony today is that you did not make any payments in any of those months from the time it was ordered to the time Javante died.
No, ma'am.
Okay. And isn't it true that you actually called Tamika Hawkins, your other baby's mother, to try to get her to take you off child support not long before these murders?
I've been trying to get her to take me off child support since she put me on child support, so I don't recall when, but I probably did.
Okay. I want to talk about the first interview that you had with law enforcement. This interview took place on November 20th, which was the day after the murders, but the same day that the bodies were discovered, right? The bodies of Brandy and her children?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You were laughing a lot in that interview. What was so funny?
Nothing was funny. It's just my character. It's how I break the tension whenever I'm having a conversation with someone that I really don't know and not comfortable speaking with.
Okay. So I guess your answer is you were laughing because you were uncomfortable?
I was laughing because I was a black man locked in a room with two guys with guns that were questioning me about stuff that I had no idea as to what was going on.
Well, I mean, you're here in court today. There's men in the rooms with guns. You're not laughing today.
Well, it's totally different because I have my family around me. I have people who love me and support me, and just a totally different situation.
I'm also, you're saying that you were laughing throughout that interview because you were uncomfortable, but we're not talking about just a little shaken up. I mean, you're laughing repeatedly throughout that interview. You would agree with that, right?
I was interacting with the officers, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, were they laughing?
I don't recall. I don't remember. I don't think so.
Were y'all having y'all were having a conversation about, they were questioning you about the deaths of these children. They weren't asking you what comedies you like to watch, and y'all were talking about what happens in those, right?
Right.
Okay.
No.
As far as your location the day of the murders, in your first interview, which, as I said before, the same day the bodies were discovered on November 20th, but the day after the murders on November 19th, you told them at that time that you were at home that day, working at your Mustang Drive address, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and that you were working on your cars from around 10 to 5. And then your wife got home at that point, right? A little after 5 o'clock?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you were there when your wife got home. That's what you told them, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you told them that you stayed home all night on Friday night until you went to bed at about 10 or so, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And that was a lie?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And they didn't ask you this. They just said, I believe their question was, what time did you go to sleep? Did you stay up late? And you said, I probably fell asleep around 10 or so. That was on page 45. And then on page 46, you volunteered all of this information. You said, what was I watching? I was watching a movie that had gone on 7 years in Tibet. I don't know what time I went to sleep, but it was on the part where he had just broken out of prison camp. That's the last thing that I remember, right? You gave them all that information?
Yes.
And that was all lies too, right?
No, that movie was actually playing on television. We were watching it. I was texting, talking to my girlfriend. My kids was right there. Yeah, we were watching it.
But it wasn't at the time, you said, right?
It was somewhere around that time.
Around 10?
Yeah.
Okay. But that wasn't the only time that you gave police a lot of details about something. You told them that the reason that you had this gunshot wound to your chest was because you were a victim of robbery, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you told them, when they asked you about that, just a second. I lost my highlighted page, so I'll just go to the original transcript. You said that you were a victim of a robbery in Mississippi. You said that you stopped to ask for directions and you got shot in the stomach. You said that the robber pulled you out of the truck. He took all your clothes off. Then he asked me for the keys to your he asked you for the keys to your truck. You said, I'm not giving you the keys to my truck. I don't know where I'm out of town. He got all of your money, he took all of your money from you that was in your pockets, because your wallet was in the center console. You gave him all of your money, he took your clothes, and he said, you're gonna give me the keys. So then you threw the keys to the side of the road, and then looked at the keys, and then he jumped at you and hit you. And then he ran away and started cussing you out, and then you said, you pussy, when I catch you, and then he turned around and just started shooting at you, right?
Right. Yes.
And that wasn't true. You actually said that the reason that you got shot was because you went to, your cousin was having issues with some guy in Mississippi, so you drove over there to have his back, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. This is a lot of impressive details, though. That's pretty elaborate.
Well, it was actually some of it was true that happened with my cousin, but I didn't want to let him know that my cousin had issues with some stuff going on, so.
So
I was
both,
trying to admit a lot of information.
okay,
So.
so for both the 7 years in Tibet and the Mississippi shooting, you tried to incorporate things that were true into your lie to make it more believable, right?
Somewhat.
Right. Pretty smart. That's a good way to be convincing. You could probably be pretty convincing, especially if you had years to think up of what to tell this jury, right?
You probably could if that was your intentions, but that's not my intentions today.
Okay. So, now we have your secret cell phone location. So you can't go with the I was at home all night story anymore, right? So you're telling us that you were at Brandy's house the evening of the murders, right?
Yes.
And you're telling us the reason that you lied to the police about your location was because you and Brandy had sex that day or that evening, and you did not want your wife to find out about it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So why didn't you just admit to police then that you were over at Brandy's house to see your son and just leave out the part about sex?
Because I had already told my wife I was gonna be home all day working on my vehicles, and I didn't want her to know I was at Brandy's house. Period. Any time of that day.
Okay, but she knew that you weren't at home working on your cars. She was home and you weren't there, right?
Yeah. She didn't know where I was or what was going on.
Okay. Well, why not just tell the police that you were over at Brandy's and just leave out the sex part?
I could have. I guess I wasn't thinking that at the time.
So just wasn't thinking about it? That was your reasoning?
Yes. I was thinking about was my wife not finding out I was just having sex with my ex-girlfriend.
Okay, so you just didn't want your wife to find out that you were over there, period, then?
Yes.
But isn't it true that you told police that Malika doesn't check up on you? You told them in your interview, Investigator Lewis said, how often do you speak to Malika? What do you mean, how often? I mean, is she always checking up on you? The reason I'm asking is, is she always checking, the reason I'm asking is she always checking up on you? And you said no. She'll call every now and then. She might, like yesterday, she called to see if I wanted to go to lunch with her. Other than that, I don't know. Right?
Well, it's obvious due to the phone records that you can see she checks up on me a whole lot.
Okay. Well, I mean, they even confronted you about that a little bit. They said, come on, after 3 affairs, I would think that she would be like, where is Henry? And you said, no. He said, no? You said, she doesn't do that. She don't be calling to check on me to see where I'm at. Right?
Yeah, that's what I said. But like I said, I was talking to the police in an interview room. I'm speaking to you now in an open court where I was sworn to tell the truth and nothing but the truth.
Okay, so you were lying to police.
Obviously.
Right. Oh, I mean, is that obvious?
It is obvious.
Do you lie
I
to
told
police
you I was
every
lying
time
to
you
him.
speak to them?
No, I don't. I don't speak to the police.
All right. In your interviews, though, in this case, you lied to them.
When it pertained to me cheating on my wife, yes, I lied to him because I did not want her to find out I was over there.
And you're saying that you lied, I guess, on a technicality because they didn't swear you in before you interviewed?
No, that wasn't the reason why I didn't lie. I mean, the reason why I did lie to them. It was just that I didn't want my wife finding out that I was still cheating on her.
Okay.
That was the main purpose of me making the whole story up to the police about I never seen or talked to Brandy during that time period.
Okay. So at the time, you wanted to make it seem like my wife doesn't check up on me. But because you didn't want them to have that secret cell phone, right? Or know that you had a secret cell phone or a reason to have one, right?
I was just hoping that they wouldn't contact my wife. That was my whole purpose of talking to them. I was hoping they wouldn't call her and contact her and tell her anything about any of this.
Okay. But we know from those messages that we've gotten from your phone that on Wednesday you did tell your wife because you forwarded Brandy's text messages to her and you actually told her, hey, Brandy's sending me these messages. I'm going to go over to Brandy's house and try to smooth out over all this child support stuff, right?
Right.
And she didn't mind then?
Right.
Okay.
Well, actually, she did mind, but I mentioned it to her before I went over there. So I had an excuse as to why I was going.
Okay. Well,
So even if we would have done anything during that time period, then yes, I was at Brandy's house. She knew where I was.
Well, we all know that you can come up with stuff pretty quickly on your feet. Why on Friday? Why didn't you just say, hey, she's on me about the child support stuff again. I'm going to swing by there one more time.
I wasn't excuse me. I talked to my wife and told her I'm gonna be working on my vehicle all day. Mm-hmm. So in the process, I'm texting Brandy, and we're talking about making plans to hook up later on that day and tomorrow. So, what was I supposed to do? Like, change plans with my wife and tell her, hey, I'm not working on my truck. I'm finna go by Brandy's and see about the child support. Talk to her about child support again.
Well, yeah, I mean, on Wednesday, whatever you were doing, you had to tell her, you know, now I'm now going over to Brandy's house to do this or that, right?
No, it was totally different.
All right, so you're saying today that your wife had not caught you cheating from the time that your son with her, Jalik, right?
Yes,
From
ma'am.
the time Jalik died to when you were arrested for this case, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the reason that you lied to police about going to Brandy's house. She had not caught you cheating all that time. You didn't want to ruin it and have police tell her something about the fact that you had cheated on her after the last time she had found out about you, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Jalik was born in May of 2008, and he died in March of 2009, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so I guess that was a little bit more than a year and a half before the murders of Brandy and her children, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it true, though, that you were not concerned about what the police were going to tell your wife? You lied to the police because you didn't want police to know your location, right?
No.
Okay. Well, you told police, though, that you continued cheating on your wife even after your wife caught you, didn't you?
Yes.
And in your interview on November 30th, 2010, you actually told police that you and Brandy broke up a couple of years ago when you went to Colorado. But y'all would still sleep around every now and then. And then Investigator Lewis tries to clarify. Okay, and this is even after your wife caught you? Because, am I incorrect? Your wife does not know about this, right? And you said, yeah. So even after your wife caught you, you were still sleeping around, and you nodded your head. And what about, and the last time you slept together, it was over a year ago? You said yes. What stopped you from continuing sleeping with Brandy? You said, I had another girlfriend. May I ask who that is? Her name was Christmas. So you told police that you cheated on your wife after she last caught you, and she didn't know about it, right?
Yeah. Colorado was the time. It was when Javante was first born.
Okay, well, you said here that the last time you slept with Brandy was a year ago. You said that in your interview.
Mm-hmm.
But then you say that you got a new girlfriend. That was the reason you stopped talking to Brandy.
Right.
And her name was Tyra. We met her last week, right?
Exactly.
Right. And then your wife found out about her.
Exactly.
So
This is the girl who I was in Crystal River with when my wife told me that my son had one night to live, and the doctor said we need to get all the family together. So I brought her back with me, and that's when I promised my wife that I wouldn't cheat on her no more. That's when I stopped talking to Tyra, and a couple months later we started back talking.
Okay, but you're saying that you broke up with Brandy, that you stopped sleeping with her 1 year before,
Mm-hmm.
and you did that in this interview. You said that you did that because you got the new girlfriend Tyra,
Mm-hmm.
and then your wife found out about Tyra. And all of that happened after your wife had first caught you cheating and she didn't know about any of that.
Well,
and the police clarified that with you, didn't they?
No. See, I was talking to Tyra like long before I started working in Crystal River. My wife just found out about Tyra like before I started working in Crystal River. So when I'm in Crystal River with Tyra, she didn't know that she was down there with me. Even though I told her I was, I stopped talking to the girl, I still was talking to her.
Okay.
So after I made the promise to her, that's when I tried to stop talking with all the rest of the girls, but eventually I started back talking with her.
So when he asked you, your wife doesn't know about this, right? And you said, yeah, you're saying that you misspoke there, that that's not true?
When he asked me, my wife doesn't know about this, what?
That you
This talking
stopped
to Tyra?
the last time you slept with Brandy was a year ago, and then you got with Tyra.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right. Right, stopped talking to Brandy, and got with Tyra a year ago. Stopped having sex with her a year ago, got with Brandy. Tyra. Something like that.
And why are you saying that you didn't want your wife to know? Because you didn't want to hurt her feelings, I guess?
I guess I wasn't really worried about hurting her feelings because I hadn't hurt her feelings so much. I was just trying to prevent our marriage from falling apart because it was already on the rocks, and I know I have one more strike at the most.
So you were basically you're trying to tell us that you were kind of monitoring what you said to the police because you didn't want it to get back to your wife.
Yes, ma'am. I didn't tell them about any of the girls I was speaking with or in relationships with.
But you weren't too scared of anything to get back to your wife. When police asked you your favorite thing about Brandy Peters, you told them sex, right?
Yes.
They could have told that to your wife, right? She probably wouldn't have been happy about that.
I think she already knew that because we had a child together, me and Brandy.
And you're saying that the reason that you didn't tell them about your current girlfriend at the time in November 2010, who was Natasha, right, you said?
Yes.
The reason that you didn't tell them about that was because you also didn't want your wife to know about that, right?
Yes.
But, I mean, you didn't tell police about Natasha because you didn't want police talking to Natasha. Isn't that true?
I didn't want my wife to find out that I had another girlfriend.
You were texting with Natasha the night of the murders from the secret phone that you were hiding from police that put you at Brandy's house the night of the murders. You didn't want them talking to Natasha because the first thing that they're going to say to Natasha is, what number do you talk to Henry Segura on? Did you talk to him on November 19th?
Okay, so
right?
When I'm at my home at 10 o'clock at night texting Natasha, I have no idea Brandy's dead. So I'm not worried about using my phone talking to Natasha or any other female I was talking to that night.
Okay, so when you lied to them about Natasha, it wasn't because you were texting her from your secret phone the night of the murders when you were at Brandy's house.
No,
that's all just a coincidence.
It was all because I was married and she was married.
Okay. And you were arrested for these murders in September of 2011 in Minnesota, right?
Yes.
And you said that you had not been caught cheating on your wife from the time Jalik died through the time that you were arrested, correct?
Close to the time I was arrested.
Close to the time you were arrested?
Yes, ma'am. It was during that time when I was going to Minnesota, right before I went to Minnesota.
Before you went to Minnesota, that's when she found out about the girl that we heard about on the jail call?
Yes.
Okay. And in that jail call, we heard that you're telling your wife you're not going to stop talking to another woman because that woman makes you happy.
Yes, ma'am.
So you really weren't concerned about your wife's feelings at that point, right?
No, at that point I wasn't. I hadn't told I wanted a divorce at that point.
Okay. So after you're arrested, at that point, you and Malika are not on good terms. She already knows that you'd been cheating on her. You have a current girlfriend that you obviously don't care if she knows about. You're saying, she makes me happy, I want to be with her, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So then you could have told police at that point in 2011 the reason that you were at Brandy's house, the legitimate reason. You could have said, I was over there to see my son. I just didn't tell you that because I didn't want Malika to find out that we had sex, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you didn't do that.
No, I didn't.
And Malika actually filed for divorce from you in July of 2016. And after she divorced you, you still didn't go to police and try to say, okay, now she's really out of my life. The real reason I was at her house was because I just didn't want her to find out I was having sex with Brandy, right?
2011, I think it was July, when I went to Minnesota. I cheated on my wife. I met this girl. We started talking. My marriage was already way downhill. So when I got with her and I went to Minnesota and I broke up with my wife, the investigation was going on for about a year, over a year. So what am I supposed to call and tell the police? They never called and updated me on anything. So I assumed that they were following up leads and getting this investigation on the way,
right,
and not worried about me and my sex life.
Sure. So, though, when you were arrested in 2011, at that point, you do have an update in the investigation, and the update is they think I did it. And at that point, you and your wife are not on good terms. She knows you have another girlfriend, so why not go to the police at that point and just say, you've got the wrong guy, here's why I lied to you. I know that you think I did it because I lied to you, but I didn't, and here's why. And you never did that, did you?
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, I talked to Joanna, I think her name. Matter of fact, I talked to her on the phone a couple times. She called me. She was calling, harassing me all the time about your, I know you killed your son, and you know he was your son, Johnson. That's her name? Johnson, Sutton Johnson? Yeah. She's called me on the phone all the time. And yes, I did tell her about my girlfriend, and she said, I already know about your girlfriend. I already know this and that. And so
And you're saying this is a police officer named Joanna Johnson who's affiliated with this case?
I don't know if her first, I know her last name is Johnson. She was the investigator on the case. She was in the second interview.
Okay.
She called my phone numerous times, and she told me she already knew about me cheating on my wife, and she already knew about the girlfriend. So what was I supposed to tell her?
Well, did you tell her the truth? Did you tell her I was over there just because to see my son, but I lied to you about the sex? You didn't tell him that?
No, I didn't tell her that. Okay. I didn't have a chance to.
Why not?
Because the way our conversation went, the phone call ended abruptly, and I didn't call her back. Okay. And every time she called me, I would refuse to call.
And so your answer is no, that you did not tell police that.
Yes, I told the lady Johnson, investigator Johnson,
you told
over
her
the phone that I was cheating on my wife. I didn't want y'all to find out, and she, excuse me, and she, like I say, she went back and forth, and we was arguing about. She know I killed my son. We're gonna arrest you for killing your son, and I hung up on her.
So your testimony is that you told police in this case over the phone.
Investigator Johnson.
Wait a minute, don't interrupt her question, Mr. Segura. Let her finish her question.
She's asking the same question over and over.
Be quiet.
No, she's.
Be quiet. Now, she asked you a question.
Who you pointing at?
You wait till she finishes.
I'm a grown man.
And then answer it, okay? Yeah. And she won't interrupt your answer either, because a court reporter can't take down two people at once. Is that clear? Sir?
Yeah, that's very clear.
All right.
Your testimony is that you did tell Officer Johnson or Investigator Johnson that you were at Brandy's home the night of the murders on November 19th.
No, I didn't tell her I was at the home the night of the murders. I told her that I was there that afternoon and we had sex.
Okay. You told them that you were there that afternoon, you had sex, and then you left.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What we saw right there, you have a little bit of a temper, right?
I'm getting aggravated. You keep asking me the same questions over and over like you're expecting a different answer.
Okay. And we know that, and I mean, you'd probably be the first one to tell us this. Brandy, she tells you what's on her mind. She's not one to hold her tongue, right?
Neither am I.
Okay. Is that kind of what has started this whole thing?
No, we were two people that we got along great. We had arguments, we fuss, we fight, we have sex, we make up. It was actually a pretty good relationship.
Can't imagine you'd be too happy about her saying she's gonna put you in jail, calling your mama a bitch, doing all those things we saw in the text messages.
Yeah, Tamika, my first baby mama, did the exact same thing, and we went through the same exact thing. I didn't go and try to kill my child because of that.
Your child with Tamika is Janae?
Yes.
And you knew Janae was yours. You knew she's your daughter.
No, not initially. Not in the beginning. I didn't.
Okay. You didn't have any doubt throughout the years that she was growing up that she was your daughter.
All the way up until she was 3, just like Javante. That's when I first met her. She was 3 years old.
I want to talk to you about the second phone. You lied to police in your interviews and you told them that you did not have a secret cell phone, right?
Yes.
Okay. And finally, after denying that you had a second phone, I guess about 20 times over the course of the 2 interviews, you finally admit to police that you have one, right?
I don't recall admitting to him I had a second phone.
Okay. Let's look at the transcript here. This is towards the end of the second interview and the clips we saw after you denied it several times. Investigator Johnson finally just gets real with you. She said, what's your other cell phone? I don't have no other cell phone. You've got a second phone. No, I don't. You do have a second phone. I know you have a second phone. No, I don't. I'm 100% positive you have a second phone, okay? Why don't you tell us about the second phone? You said, I don't have a second phone. I had a second phone. I don't have one. And she said, well, where was the phone? What's the number? Right?
Yes, ma'am. I remember that.
Okay. So at that point, police know you have a second phone. Oh wait, I wanted to also show you this. They asked you, who were you talking to on the phone? And you say, friends, females, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So at this point, police know you have a second phone. You have admitted that you had a second phone. And you've also admitted that you talked to females on that phone, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, I mean, the cat's kind of out of the bag about that at that point, right?
Not necessarily, because I told him I said I don't have a second phone. I had a phone, because I hadn't got rid of the phone. So technically, I didn't have a phone. I had a phone.
Okay.
But
Go ahead. The cat's out of the bag, I'm saying, as far as you having a second phone that you talk to girls on.
yes,
Okay. So at that point, though, you still don't say, all right, I do have this secret phone. I was sleeping with Brandy. Here's the number, but I did not commit these murders, right?
no, I didn't say that.
Okay. Instead, you start acting like you don't remember the number. They say, what was the number? You say 408 something. I don't remember it by heart. I don't even remember it by heart. I didn't know it. That's what you told them, right?
Yeah, I didn't know it.
I'm sorry?
I said no, I didn't remember the number by heart.
You didn't remember the number? That's your testimony?
No, I didn't know it by heart.
I mean, in that interview, you had given your primary phone number by heart, your primary cell phone number by heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your home number by heart, your mom and dad's numbers by heart. But you're saying you didn't know the number to your secret cell phone by heart?
Well, I just got the phone from a friend of mine that left it in my truck, so I was using it, so I didn't know the number by heart.
Well, if you don't know the number by heart, how are you going to give it out to all the women?
Whenever I get their number, I put it in my phone and call them, and they have my number like that.
Okay. So you're saying at that point you just honestly didn't remember the number.
I really didn't remember it.
But when police ask you where the phone is, you say, well, first you told them, I don't have the phone. What did you do with it? I threw it away. Why did you throw it away? I didn't need it. I don't need it. And then they asked you, you said the phone is not active. I don't have the phone anymore. That's what I'm telling you. They said, when did it go inactive? You say, I don't know how long it's been, to be honest with you. And then you were also trying to tell them that this was way before Brandy passed away. This was a long time ago, right? You were trying to act like the second phone wasn't something that you recently had. You had it long before then, weren't you?
I don't know if I was trying to act like that or not, but I just didn't want them getting this information back to my wife. That was the whole purpose of me telling them what I told them.
Okay, because you didn't want your wife to know that you were seeing Brandy.
I didn't want her to know I was seeing any of the females I was seeing at the time.
Because you said Brandy had some issue where if she had your number, she would just call you off the hook.
Yes.
Okay, but she had your primary cell phone number, didn't she?
She did.
Okay. She texted you on that the day of the murders, didn't she?
Yes.
Okay. And then police confront you. They say, listen, we know people who have talked to you on it as recently as Monday. And you're like, that's not possible. And they said, yes, it was the Monday after Thanksgiving, after these murders, after all this happened. And you finally say, yeah, probably, right?
Yes.
So why did you throw the phone away just a few days after these murders?
Well, I assumed that the police, were going to get in touch with my wife, and I wanted to be sure she didn't have any access to that telephone, because I had pictures, I had text messages, I had all kind of stuff that I knew she didn't need to see, or we would have probably got a divorce a whole lot sooner in 2016.
Okay, so your answer is you threw it away because you didn't want Malika to find out?
Yes.
And it's just kind of a coincidence this is 3 days after these murders?
I didn't think of it as a coincidence at the time.
Okay. I mean, you were always scared, though, of Malika finding out about that phone, right?
No, not in particular before this all happened.
Right.
Because the police kept calling and harassing us and coming by the house, and she trying to figure out why. And she don't know the reason why is because me and Brandy had sex that day, so I'm trying to keep this from her.
Right. But I'm saying just the secret cell phone in general. That was something you always wanted to keep secret from her, Malika, right?
Yes.
Okay. But you didn't end up throwing it away until right after these murders. Then you threw it away.
Yes.
Okay. And you were so concerned about her finding it that you told police that you threw it away in the trash can at your house where
Yes.
you live with her?
Yes.
Okay.
The dumpster out front.
And while we're talking about the cell phone locations and everything, you've obviously had an opportunity here in court to look at all the evidence before you've testified about today, to hear it all and see it all with the jury, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you and your attorneys, y'all have had the reports and the information about this case, all of the cell phone evidence that we showed the jury, y'all have had that for years, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Long before you've been able to tell this story to the jury today, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You never got rid of your primary cell phone after the murders, did you?
No, ma'am.
But you talked to other women on that cell phone too, didn't you?
No, not really.
Who's Heather?
Heather?
Yeah.
I
Heather.
couldn't tell you.
You don't know who that is?
No.
Alright, I'm looking at, these are text messages incoming and outgoing to your 509 number. This is an outgoing text message to Heather. You say, send me a picture of that pussy. I know you got some on you. Right?
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry?
I say, yeah, I see it, but yeah, I don't remember seeing it.
Okay, so you were also talking to other women on your primary cell phone, weren't you?
I might have, was that before? I don't really remember that, yeah.
You don't remember texting a girl and asking for pictures of her vagina?
No, but now that you recall, I do remember a girl named Heather, yeah. But no,
So-
I didn't remember sending that text message.
Okay.
But that does sound like something I would say.
But the answer is yes, you did talk to other women on your primary 509 cell phone?
Occasionally, I guess.
And you didn't throw that cell phone away. I guess you weren't worried about Malika finding anything on it, huh?
Well, actually, Malika had a way of finding everything on my phone. That's why I always use the second phone.
Okay. Why were you still texting other women from your primary phone then?
I bet you probably couldn't find a whole bunch of text messages from her, because I noticed when I call someone and we're on the phone for an hour or better, or I'm texting someone in wee hours of the night,
Well,
Malika
unfortunately,
would call the number and find out who it is. And find out who
unfortunately,
I'm
we
talking
only
to.
have a few days of text before the murder, so I don't have a whole lot to work with. But
Yeah, I didn't use my primary phone too often to call other women.
Heather was texting you, and then, as you said, Brandy also had that number, right?
Yes,
Okay. And
it was more females than
I'm
those.
sorry, I didn't ask. Are you answering the last question I asked?
Yeah, you say Heather and Brandy text me from that number.
Right.
Yeah, I had Natasha knew that number. Plenty of females I talked to knew that number,
Okay.
but when I got the primary phone, the other phone, I told them to stop using this number and call me on this number.
All right, but this message that you sent to Heather for her to send pictures of her vagina to you, that was on November 12th, right?
That's what time it says. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you had your second cell phone.
What time was it?
Secret cell. 1:31.
In the afternoon.
No, in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, that was due to me being hooked on having sex, I guess.
My whole point is that you talk to other women on your 509 primary cell phone, right? Okay. The reason that you didn't throw your primary cell phone away, because you did talk to other women on it. The reason that you didn't throw it away is because you wanted it to be your alibi, didn't you? For this
No,
case.
that's the phone I use for work. Everybody has that number. That's where I get most of my jobs. Contractors call me on that number to go to work. So.
Okay. And I understand that. But when police asked you, I guess is your answer that no, you didn't want it to be your alibi?
No, I wasn't looking at it for an alibi with the police. I was thinking about Malika not being able to find out that I was at Brandy's house that day. I wasn't thinking about the police.
When police asked you, I've got to try to verify that you're at your house on Friday, okay? Any suggestion as to how I do that? You said, you can check my phone.
I knew my primary phone was at home that day because I didn't bring it to Brandy's house.
Right. So you were telling them that that's your alibi. You can check my phone, right?
Yes.
Why would you leave your main cell phone at home if you didn't want it to be your alibi?
Because in actuality, in a sense, it was my alibi to Malika that excuse me, I'm at home. She wanted to call my phone. She had a way of checking my phone. I didn't know she had I don't know if she had a tracking device on my phone or everything. Every time I did anything with that phone, she found out about it.
How would
So
she
I
do
left
that?
the phone home.
How would she do that?
I have yet to ask her and find out,
Okay.
but she most definitely can do it.
Isn't it true that at a prior proceeding you were asked that same question? Why did you leave your main cell phone, your primary phone, at your house when you went over to Brandy's house? And your answer was,
So I didn't want my wife to find out that I was over there.
did you? No, you said the reason I left it was Malika always had a way of knowing, or anytime I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, she knew about it. I got an email address. She can get in my email address. She can get in my Facebook account. She always found out about it.
Yeah.
How did she find out about your locations from your Facebook account?
Like I'm telling you, I don't know what she used to do. I don't know if I had an iPhone, so I don't know if she had a tracker thing on it then. I don't know.
Well, isn't it true that if you were to show, if your Facebook were to show a location, it's because you logged in and added a location to show the public? It just doesn't automatically do that for you, right?
I don't know how that works, but I do recall on Facebook where you can show your location and place where you are. But
Right. If you
I don't know
that.
exactly. I don't know all the features on how it works.
Right, but if you decide to share that with the public, she can't just look at your Facebook and see that you're at Brandy's house. That's not how it works. You would agree with that, right?
No, I don't agree with that because I don't know. I'm not 100% sure how that works. So no.
You're saying you don't know how Facebook works?
No, I haven't seen Facebook in like a long time.
Well, it hadn't changed much. You're saying you don't know how it worked in 2010?
No, I know that if I did a certain thing, I can put my location in, but I don't know the ins and outs of it.
That's my point. That's something that you would have to actively do. That's not something that she can just get on the internet and see that you're at Brandy's house, right?
I don't know if she could or couldn't is what I'm telling you.
All right. If you didn't want your primary phone to be your alibi, why delete the text from Malika to your primary phone on November 19th?
Why did I delete the primary text, the text on my primary phone?
From the text from Malika on your phone from the 19th.
From Malika?
Mm-hmm.
Or from Brandy?
From Malika.
I don't know. I don't know what text did I delete from Malika?
The ones on the 19th.
I don't know.
So it's not just because they were inconsistent with your alibi?
Oh, you mean the text when I was gone and she was continuing to text me? Yeah. Oh no, I just cleared all of, if you look at my phone records, you'll see I deleted everything on Brandy's and just about everything from Malika's that Malika texted me. Because one of the text messages that Brandy sent me, I sent to Malika. And in that text message, some of the string of text messages that was in there with Malika's. So when I deleted it, I took all of them out.
I'm talking about what Malika sent to you.
I know.
Nothing to do with Brandy.
Yeah, I took all those text messages out.
You deleted all those?
Yes.
The ones where she's saying, "Where are you?"
Yes.
The night of November 19th.
Yes.
And the reason that you deleted those is because it's not consistent with your alibi that you were at home, right?
No, you don't need the phone to look at a text message. I did know that. Like, you don't need a phone to look at a text message. So if that's the case, I'm not hiding anything, obviously.
So you don't know how Facebook works, but you do know how Cellbrights work.
No, I don't.
Forensic digital.
I never heard of
communication.
Cellbright. Never heard of Cellbright. But I just know a buddy of mine that had a cell phone and told me his wife got all the stuff off of the internet or something. So I assumed that was the same thing.
In that first interview with police, police did not give you any details of how Brandy died, did they?
No, ma'am.
Actually, they didn't give you any details about how any of Brandy or her children died, right?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I guess you'd probably tell us you didn't even know that she survived, all these gunshot wounds and literally had to be beaten to death until, I guess, you read the reports for the case. Is that what you'd probably tell us?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when I say read reports for the case, that would have been after your arrest, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yet, at the end of your interview with police on November 20th, so just 24 hours after these murders, police ask you to describe Brandy, and out of any word in the world, you say she was a survivor.
Yes.
Didn't you?
She was, yes.
That's the word that you chose?
She was a survivor. She, whatever, at all costs, she knew how to make it happen. When she didn't have no food in the house or no money, she knew how to make it happen. She was a survivor.
Well, we know she was a survivor. She fought her butt off, that's for sure.
She did.
Only something at that point that the person who committed these murders would know, right?
Well, the person who committed the murders should have a bunch of bruises and marks and scrapes and scratches all over them from her fighting, because I'm sure she did fight with all she had in her.
And a good person for us to look to for guidance on that would probably be the medical examiner. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You said that she was a survivor also because she always found a way to make it, even if she didn't have money to put food on the table.
Yes.
And that happened quite a bit, right?
Well, I just know from stories of me, when I first met her, we talked a lot, and she told me about growing up and, stuff she had endured and stuff she went through and how she made it. And
okay. She was not a well-to-do person.
what do you mean by well-to-do?
She didn't have money.
No. She wasn't from no rich family or nothing like that.
Right. I mean, even at the time, she's driving a broken-down car her mom gave her. She's living in Section 8 housing, right?
Yes, she was living in Section 8 housing.
All right. You told your attorney that you didn't commit these murders.
I told the world I didn't commit these murders.
Okay. Why wouldn't you?
You say, why wouldn't I?
Right.
Because I have no reason whatsoever to kill my son or those twins. Neither Brandy.
So you just have no reason to do it?
No reason whatsoever. I wouldn't. What would I kill a child for?
Okay.
Let alone children.
You told us that you love these twins. They were like daughters to you.
Yes.
And you said that they called you daddy, you potty trained them, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Isn't it true that in neither one of your interviews you ever asked police how they died?
I already knew how they died.
How?
They were found in the tub.
How?
What's her name? Pint told me that the kids were found in the tub.
Pint told you that?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, what does that mean, though? How do you know how they died just because they were found in a tub?
Well, I assumed they were found in the tub. I assumed they had drowned.
Okay, so they couldn't have been shot and then put in a tub or strangled and put in a tub. You just assumed that they drowned?
Yeah, I assumed all of them had drowned, but one of them actually was shot and put in the tub.
Okay.
But I didn't find that out till later.
All right, I want to touch on two things then. Isn't it true that in your interview, that Pint told you that your son was with some other guy, but that the two girls, your son was with another guy, but the two girls, the kids were killed. Your son wasn't found in the house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So you didn't tell police anything about the fact that you knew that the girls had drowned, did you?
No.
You just said that she told you they were killed.
Well, that's what I told him in the interview, but yeah, she told me they were found. I'm pretty sure she told me they were found in the tub.
And in fact, in a prior proceeding in this case, you never asked how the girls died, did you? And you said no.
No.
And then he asked, you already knew that one, right? And your response was, no, I just wanted to know how my son died.
Yeah, I want to know how my son died because, like I say, Pint told me the kids were found in the tub, and she said that my son was not in the house.
Yeah, but here you're saying you didn't know how the girls died. You said no. And that the reason that you didn't ask how the girls died was because you just wanted to know how your son died. That's what we just saw.
Well, that's what I said.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying that's what you're saying today is different than what you said before,
No, it's
right?
not different from what I'm saying. What I said before, I just didn't say that before. They
Okay.
asked me a question. I told them that I just wanted to know how my son died.
So when he asked you already knew how the girls died, right? And you said no. That's not different than today. You're telling us that you knew that the girls had drowned because Pint told you that?
Yes, I guess, yes. When you put it that way, it does look different.
police also asked you, this is November 20th, if you could turn the clock back 24, 36 hours, what would you do different, or would you do anything differently? And you said, yeah. What would you do? And you said, pick my son up, right?
Excuse me. Yes, ma'am. Yes,
You
ma'am.
didn't mention anything about picking these twins up too who were killed, who were so close to you, did you?
Well, I felt real bad because all the time Javante was growing up, I never spent time with him. I never got a chance to really know him. He didn't know me as a father figure, and I felt bad. I felt like his life was taken away from him, and he didn't never have a chance to live it.
Okay, so the answer is no, that you did not tell police that if you could turn back the clock, you wouldn't also pick these twins up that you were so close to.
No, I didn't say that. I said I wanted to pick my son up.
Right. So the answer is no?
Right.
Okay. I want to talk about Javante. You said, I have no reason to kill him, but you did owe over $20,000 on him, right?
Yes.
And you didn't consider him your son. I mean, let's be honest.
Actually, I did consider him my son, but I was unsure 100% whether he was or wasn't. But I considered him my son because I signed a birth certificate. I was there with him when he was born, so.
Yeah, but since then, his mom, his own mother, so the person that was obviously there when he was conceived, gave birth to him, she's telling you, you're stupid for thinking he's yours, isn't she?
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't want to pay child support for him, isn't that true?
Actually, I wanted to pay child support so that I wouldn't have to deal with her, like in that aspect as to going over, giving her cash money.
I'll rephrase my question. You were writing letters contesting the fact that you should have to pay child support for him, isn't that true?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And you said that you didn't get to see him very much because you were too busy to drive across town to see him. That was kind of hard to do with your job and other obligations that you had.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But on the day of November 19th, you were willing to wait, I guess, for Brandy and Javante to get home and not have her mom over. You got there at, you said, 1-ish, and you didn't go in the house until 5. So you waited outside down the road for 4 hours for them, right?
Right. And I wasn't waiting for them. I was waiting for her. I wanted to have sex. We hadn't talked up. We'd been on the phone all day talking about what we was going to do, how we was going to do it, and I was amped up, ready to go, and I wanted to do it. So.
You said that every time you went over there, y'all ended up having sex, yet you hadn't been over there in months, and you're too busy to drive over there. You also told us all those things, didn't you?
Well, every time I went over there, we didn't have sex, because I went there Wednesday, we didn't have sex.
I guess my question is, on the day of the murders, you were willing to drive over there and wait for 4 hours to see them?
To have sex, yes.
The answer is yes?
To have sex, yes.
Okay.
I probably would have waited all night. She would have called me and told me to come back, wait till midnight.
Well, you had other opportunities to have sex with other people besides Brandy that day, right? You and Natasha were texting about having sex, weren't you?
Well, it was different with Brandy.
Okay. Is your answer yes, that you also were texting other women about sex that day, other women that you could have had sex with?
Yes.
Okay. But you were willing to wait 4 hours to have sex specifically with Brandy?
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, I would have waited longer than that, probably.
All right, so you told us when your attorney was asking you questions that you were on your way, you said you were on your way to Sop Choppy, right? To your friend Adam Thornton's house when Pint called you with the news that Brandy and her kids were killed?
No, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry, where were you?
I think I was coming from Sop Choppy, and I called Pint to set up an appointment to get my son's hair done.
Okay, I'm sorry, my bad. So you call Pint to get your son's hair braided, and in your direct, I couldn't help but notice you actually said you were going to get your youngest son's hair braided.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but he wasn't actually your youngest son, was he?
No, he was my youngest son at the time.
Okay. Well, Javante was your youngest son at the time, right?
Actually, Jalik would have been my youngest son at the time if that was the case.
Unfortunately, Jalik had passed away at that point, and Javante had passed away as well at that point, but you didn't know it. All you knew at that point was that he was missing, right?
No, well, actually, I didn't know anything until I called her.
Right, I'm saying that you're on your way to get your son's hair braided, and that's where you saw Pint. You said you took your youngest son. I'm trying to point out, Javante was actually your youngest son, right?
Oh, well, yeah, I have an older son and a younger son. He's the
I mean,
youngest of my two with my wife. So yeah, I always call him my youngest son.
you'd already killed Javante at that point, so you knew he wasn't your youngest son anymore.
Man, check this out. If I'm gonna kill Javante, why not bring him home with me and kill Brandy? That way I don't have to pay child support and I can raise my son like I want to.
Would your wife be okay with that?
She wouldn't have to be. She wouldn't have to be okay with it.
You said in your interview she didn't even want you giving these kids Christmas presents or
That's
going
why I
over there to
said
see
she wouldn't
them.
have to be okay with it. If I had a chance to be with my son, to take my son so he wouldn't be hurt, then me and her just wouldn't be together.
You were willing to lie to police about a murder charge of children in order to protect your wife from knowing that you were just even over at Brandy's house.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying that your wife and you would have welcomed Brandy's child with you into your home and raised him as your own?
That's not what I'm saying. My wife would not have welcomed Brandy's son and my son into our home. But if I would have known my son was going to be in any danger, then yes, I most definitely would have did away with my marriage so that my son could still be here today.
Okay, so let's then talk about how you react when your son could be in danger. You find out from Pint that your son is missing. Everyone else in his family is killed. He is missing. He's with another guy.
Right.
Did you call police to see if you could help in the search for your son?
No.
Did you call Brandy's family, offer your condolences, try to help them in any way?
I don't know any of their numbers. I just know where some of them live at.
Did you drive over to Brandy's house, the scene of these murders, and say, "Where's my son? What's going on? How can I help? I just saw them yesterday. What can I do?" You didn't do any of that, did you?
No, I didn't have to, because by the time I had both of my kids with me when I found this news out. So by the time I made it to her house to drop my kids off, that's when she told me that my son was killed. As
Okay,
well.
so
They found him
your
in the
answer
bottom
is-
of the tub. She said they found him in the tub under the girls.
Your answer is no, that you didn't call anyone after you found out your son was missing and the rest of his family was dead.
No, I didn't. I had to process it inside of myself before
Your
I can talk to
response-
anyone about it.
Your response once you found that out was taking your other son to get his hair braided, going to the barber shop.
Well, my wife was out shopping somewhere doing something, and I had both the kids with me. I didn't have nowhere else to bring them.
All right, it's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Okay. And isn't it true that... One second. Isn't it true that, you really couldn't have cared less about Javante?
That's very untrue.
He was nothing but a drain on your bank account, right?
No, how could he have been just a drain on my bank account if I never paid the child support that they was ordering me to pay?
Evidently you're saying you're paying all this money under the table to Brandy through money orders and Pampers and all these things.
Yeah, Pampers don't cost anything, and I was only giving her like $100 here, $100 there, so
Well,
it was
I'll
nothing
rephrase
major.
my question. You were conscious about the fact that he was a drain on your bank account. You were getting hassled by DOR. You were being asked for a lot of money for him, right? By
Yes.
everybody.
Yeah, I was being asked by
Brandy, by DOR, by everybody, right?
DOR is the only people who. Yes.
Isn't it true that when police asked you about his funeral, your only response was, "I'm sure I'll be the one paying for it," right? They said, "Are you going to make arrangements?" She said, "I'll have to talk to her mama. I'm sure I'll be the one paying for it."
Yeah.
You mentioned in your questioning by your attorney that you had this stolen car in your possession that you tried to get rid of a couple days after the murders, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we saw a text message, I think, about that yesterday, didn't we?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and isn't it true that you swapped out the VIN on that car, the VIN number that's on the dashboard of that car, you swapped it out, right?
I had it swapped out, but I didn't swap it out myself. So, yeah, I knew it was swapped out because the car was stolen.
Okay, and the purpose of that, of swapping out a VIN number, is to keep people from realizing that it's stolen, right?
That's if you do it internally. You have to go into the engine block and take it off. You got places in the trunk. The VIN number is a lot of different places.
Right, but the
just
most visible place is in the windshield, and that's the one that you swapped out, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the purpose of that was to keep people from finding out that it was stolen.
Yes, ma'am.
So you do have some experience trying to cover up crimes, don't you?
Yes. Dealing with stolen cars, yeah.
You said that you didn't do this, you didn't kill them, you wouldn't do that. But isn't it true that you would almost kill someone, right?
You say, is it true that I would almost kill someone?
You would try to kill someone, right?
I don't think I understand the question.
You would take a gun in your hand and point it at somebody and pull the trigger.
If you had a gun pointed at me, threatening me or my family, and I had a gun on me, yes, I most definitely would pull the gun out and prevent you from hurting me or my family.
Sure.
If
I
I
think
could.
we all believe in self-defense here. That's a law, actually. I'm talking about the fact that you drove to Mississippi because your cousin was having issues with somebody, right?
Right.
And there was a confrontation, right?
Right.
And you took a gun to that confrontation.
I took a gun. I had a gun in my vehicle because I was out of town working. I kept a gun in my vehicle when I was out of town working.
So, but you had it on you, right?
It was in my vehicle, yes.
I don't think you understand my question. During this shootout, you had a gun on you, right?
Yes.
Okay. And people were shooting guns at you and your cousin, and you were shooting guns at those people too. It was a shootout.
People started shooting guns at me and my cousin, and yes, I returned fire to protect me and my cousin.
Okay. So in this confrontation that you're saying your cousin is going to confront these people that he has issues with, he's calling his cousin to come have his back. You drive up there for this confrontation, yet they come to you and they start shooting at you first.
No, I didn't drive up there for a confrontation. I was driving up there so it wouldn't be a confrontation.
Yet you took your gun with you.
What was I going to do? Leave it at the hotel?
And isn't it true that in your direct testimony a second ago, you said that you drove up there not to prevent a confrontation. You said you went up there to have your cousin's back.
Exactly.
Those were your exact words.
That's
have his back.
That's
with these
preventing a
issues with
conversation.
people he was having.
That's preventing a confrontation.
Having somebody's back in a fight is preventing confrontation? You were going there for backup and you were taking your gun.
It wasn't supposed to be a fight, is what I'm trying to tell you.
How is it not supposed to be a fight? If he's having issues with somebody, he's calling for backup, you're taking a gun, and you're saying that's self-defense?
It's definitely self-defense when someone takes a firearm and point it towards you and starts to pull the trigger.
And so your answer is yes, that you would point a gun at someone and shoot them in the confrontation like that?
If someone points a gun at me, yes, I would point a gun back at them in self-defense.
Right.
Is that the question?
In a situation where you're saying you were only going there to prevent things from happening, not to have his back like you told us before.
I went there to have his back and prevent an altercation from escalating.
Let me ask it this way. You took a gun to the confrontation. You knew there was a possibility that you were going to be using it.
Yes.
Okay. So we've learned that you carry a gun. You will shoot it at somebody, especially if you're going to have your cousin's back. You lied to your wife repeatedly. You lied to the rest of your family. You lied to your girlfriends. You lied to the police multiple times over the course of interviews. And, I mean, you lied to God too, right, when you made all of your promises to him.
Yes.
And yet you're asking this jury to believe everything you have to say today.
Yes, because
And
in the process of me lying and doing all this lying, I had a whole lot of time to sit down and think about all the mistakes I made, all the wrongs I done to my wife and my ex-girlfriend and my other girlfriends that I cheated on, all the kids I had outside of my marriage, and I've learned how to right my wrongs. So.
Okay, and you're doing this completely to right your wrongs, not to escape accountability for anything that you did.
I don't feel like I need to escape accountability for anything. I think the evidence points to itself. The evidence is everything in itself.
Okay, so the fact that you had a .32 revolver,
In July.
Your DNA's on the bathtub bar. You were located there before Brandy's phone went off the network forever. All that evidence speaks for itself, right?
My DNA was not on the bath bar. That's something he made up.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. When your attorney asked you about these two, he said, have you had 2 crimes of dishonesty before?
Yes.
You have been convicted 2 different times of 2 crimes of dishonesty, right?
Did I? No, I took a plea. It was just a petty theft charge. It was nothing major.
It's not whether you
It was
pled or
a-
you took it to trial. You
it
were
was a
convicted
misdemeanor.
is my question.
Yeah, it was a
Of
misdemeanor petty theft.
2 different crimes of dishonesties.
In actuality, it was only one, but the way the court do it, actually it wasn't even petty theft. It was dealing in stolen property, and they dropped it down to a petty theft. So they put 2 charges on my record,
Okay.
as
so
if I did both of them.
it was actually originally arrested for a felony.
Right. Dealing in
For-
stolen property. I brought some CDs that were stolen. I tried to sell them to the Vinyl Fever, and they came back stolen, and
Okay. So that's a yes?
they reduced it down to a petty theft. So yes.
Just a moment. His cousin that you went to have his back in Mississippi and you ended up shooting at people. Is his name Roski?
No.
What's his name?
Why do I have to say his name?
Why wouldn't you?
His name is Jarvis.
Jarvis?
Yes.
Is his nickname Roski?
No. Jarvis lives in Louisiana. Roski lives in Tallahassee,
Right. And where does Jarvis live?
Louisiana.
Does he come here often?
No.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Redirect.
May I move the podium
I'm
back?
sorry. Here, please.
Mr. Segura, I want to ask you about the semantics of the question pertaining to your knowledge of the manner in which the twins died. By the time you're answering questions for the police, you've already talked on 2 different occasions, correct?
Yes, sir.
And ascertained that the twins were found in the bathtub.
Yes, sir.
And also ascertained by that point that Javante was found in the bathtub.
Yes, sir.
And you've indicated that that is the extent of your knowledge about how they were found, and you formed the opinion that they had drowned based on where they were found.
Yes.
You didn't actually know that they were, like how they died, you just knew they were found in the
Objection
bathtub.
to leading.
Sustained.
Okay.
Did you have exact knowledge of how they died, or did you draw that assumption?
I draw that assumption because she said they were in the bathtub.
So it was true that you didn't know how they died.
I didn't know how they died.
Okay. Fair to say that this has been a frustrating process for you?
It's been an 8-year-long frustrating process.
You sat in custody for 8 years, waiting to get here in front of the jury.
Yes.
Lost your marriage.
Lost everything.
So fair to say when you express a little frustration, it goes beyond repetitious.
I believe it goes beyond what anyone in here can ever understand or comprehend.
Yes, sir. No further questions.
Hey, Jerry, I have a question of this witness.
Please do.
If not, you can step down. Start sitting down. Don't say anything further. That would take 10 minutes.
any of his findings as it relates to the phones for Mr. Segura and the testimony of Sergeant Corbett. Last time we were here, he also testified as to phone locations for Mr. Griffin, whereas it's possible that that could become relevant at some point. At this point, we have not laid any foundation as to the fact of Mr. Griffin's involvement in any way, shape, or form with this particular crime. You know, Mr. Santos may or may not, depending on how that goes, of course, and of course we've already ruled out Mr. Griffin. So at this point, there's been no foundation for him to testify regarding Griffin's phone number or the phone contents at this particular time, and we would object to that, as well as the phone records coming in from Mr. Griffin.
Are you planning to get into that, Mr. Brown?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll sustain that objection at this point in time. It's just gonna cause confusion. Be talking about somebody they know nothing about at this point in time and may never know anything about. But anyway.
Well, I guess let me clarify, because the court had previously ruled that the whole piece of testimony regarding DeMario Paramore and Haywood Griffin, the operation that was run with a confidential informant, which produced their confession, which Lieutenant Basio himself heard and testified to during the last trial. When you pair the confession that implicates both the
When I hear that testimony, then I'll rule, maybe allow Mr. Sawicki to testify. We haven't had that testimony, so it's only gonna cause confusion at this point in time.
Yes, sir. Then I would call Lieutenant Basio instead at this point, if it's all right with the court.
Okay.
Your Honor, of course, Mr. Basio, I think it's the Sergeant Basio at this point, but anyway, as far as his testimony goes, there is I believe what's going to be elicited is the recording allegedly said by Gregory Washington, and given those circumstances, Your Honor, at this point, there's been no identification of Gregory. Last time we had Gregory Washington come forward and testify about who was on the phone, who was on the recording, what circumstances surrounding the recording, and everything along those lines before we heard it. In this particular case, we're putting in Sergeant Basio up without any of those explanations about who those parties are or anything along those lines, and the only identificational aspect they have on that is through Greg Washington, who he has not testified at this particular time. So I would object to the order of that as well, because the foundation has not been laid for this particular piece of evidence.
I thought Lieutenant Basio was present.
He was not present, he was monitoring the audio recording, but he was not present to identify the persons that were on it.
For clarity's sake, he did conduct a custodial interview after that recording took place, and he questioned DeMario Paramore about that.
Who are you planning to call? What are you planning to call him about?
The fact that they ran an operation utilizing a confidential informant, that the informant was affixed with a wire, that the informant was sent out to talk to DeMario Paramore, that DeMario Paramore did in fact confess to himself and Mr. Griffin being involved in the murder, that Mr. Basio heard that himself and then talked to Mr. Paramore after that in a custodial setting interview, and that based on the information provided by Mr. Paramore, the Tallahassee Police Department did not follow up on evidence that may have either included or excluded Paramore and Griffin as suspects in the case.
And Your Honor, if we can clarify whether he's going to have Officer or Sergeant Basio testify as the recording or play the actual recording itself, I would argue that he's not playing the recording and simply Investigator Basio describing it. That's not the best evidence. Best evidence would be back to the recording.
As you recall, the recording doesn't exist.
That's right.
clearly statements against penal interest, but for that exception to apply, the declarant has to be unavailable. What showing do we have that Washington and Paramore are not available?
Your Honor, they weren't admitted as hearsay exceptions last time. They were admitted pursuant to Chambers. The court made a threshold finding that the statements were reliable based on the fact that Investigator Basio at the time listened to them over the wire. Chambers, again, basically stands for the proposition that when there's an out-of-court confession, if there's any corroborative evidence whatsoever, I'm summarizing obviously, it has to be admitted, and it was admitted on that basis pursuant to due process previously.
And Your Honor, last time the difference is Gregory Washington did in fact testify prior to this recording coming in, and therefore there was corroborative evidence. In this particular case, there is not.
Gregory Washington testified to out-of-court statements as well. The point is that it's not a hearsay analysis, it's a Chambers analysis, and that's the basis on which they were admitted previously.
And Your Honor, they're
Is
actually.
Washington available or not?
He is.
Yes,
What?
he
He's
is.
in custody.
Right. Well, I don't think there's a reason to invoke Chambers unless the witness is unavailable. But things change when between whether the witness testifies or not, does not testify. So I'm not gonna let Basio testify in absence of testimony from Washington. I know he's a little bit of a loose cannon and things kind of went both ways with him last time, but if he's available as a witness, I'm not gonna just let Basio get up and testify.
Your Honor, my position is, I guess I don't need to state it if the court's already ruled.
I've ruled.
So,
I mean, I'm not saying that Basio cannot testify, but I'm gonna have to hear from Washington first.
yes, sir. Then I'm gonna need Washington out.
It'll take at least 10 minutes, Judge, to get him on.
Anything else we need to sort out while we're doing it?
Not this time, Your Honor. I don't know. The only reason they're coming issues is the order being called in. If they're called in a different order, then they wouldn't have been an issue, but that's kind of why the objections are happening.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Prince would rather not call Gregory Washington.
I'm sure he
Can
would
help
too.
it, given the way it turned out last time, but anyway, so I mean, I don't criticize the order, I'm just.
No, I'm just saying that's why I've been bringing up the issues is because of that aspect.
Anything else we can sort out while
Not
we're
from
waiting
the
on him
defense.
to be brought up?
Not from the defense, Your Honor.
You-
No, Your Honor.
So you have an idea how much you're gonna have, Mr. Prince?
Yes, sir. I was hoping, and I don't know, we may have to, if the court permits us to go late today to do this. I was hoping to get through Santos, now Washington, Basio, Sawicki, and then some short witnesses, Dahana Scott and Cicely Timmons today. I don't know.
I think if we started on Santos right now, we wouldn't be done this afternoon. Given what I've heard in the past, I've never heard a short answer from him.
That's true. Maybe it would be better given the time to do Santos tomorrow, and that doesn't really mess my order up, so. But Dahana Scott has a flight, so I do intend to call her today, no matter what.
Remind me what that involves,
She was the neighbor right next to Miss Peters' house.
the barking dog.
Yes, sir.
That's, yeah,
Yes.
well, that's kind of independent of everything else.
Yes, sir.
If you wanna go ahead and call her, what, we're
Yeah, we can do
getting
that.
Washington brought up.
Yes, sir, that's fine.
I'll go get it.
Okay, why don't you can get him somewhere close and we'll get this other witness.
You wanna pick that up that you dropped?
What's that?
Can you pick that up that you dropped in the box?
I could,
Okay, are we ready for the jury again?
Hold on, I gotta get.
let's get it. Is that your stuff or is that the jury's stuff?
I can do it. I was doing two things at one time, that's why I was trying to
All right.
get you to do it for me.
Let him get her. What's that? We're not waiting on you, you can step out. jury.
All rise for the jury.
But if you see it, please, you would face the clerk here, raise your right hand, please, ma'am. Be sworn.
You swear affirm testimony about to give in this case to be true, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
I do.
Brandy?
Ms. Scott, can you please introduce yourself to the jury, spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name is Dahana Scott, Delta Alpha Hotel Alpha November Alpha Scott Sierra Cat Oscar Tango Tango.
And where were you living back in November of 2010?
912 Saddle Creek Run,
Where was
Tallahassee,
I'm
Florida.
sorry. Where was that house located relative to Brandy Peters' house?
She was my direct neighbor to my right.
Okay. And there was a fence that separated y'all's property?
Correct.
Okay. Directing your attention to the late night hours of November 19th, 2010, you remember about what time you got home that night?
Around 11.
And when you arrived home, did you notice any vehicles in Miss Peters' driveway?
I believe there was like a white SUV parked on the side.
Okay. And at some point after you arrived home, did you let your dog outside?
We have two dogs. We had one that stayed inside with my daughter and myself, and then we had another dog that was outside, that stayed outside at all times.
At some point after you arrived, did your dogs, or one of your dogs, or both your dogs, start barking vigorously?
Zeus, the one that stayed outside.
Okay. And what direction was he barking in?
He was pacing along the fence line towards Brandy's house.
Okay. And how long did that go on?
Quite a while.
Okay. What did he? Did you observe your dog go off in any other direction, or did he continue to focus on the fence?
No, he was by the fence.
Adjacent to Brandy's yard. Okay. How long after you got home do you think he started barking like that?
Well, I was actually on the phone with a friend of mine, and it had to be after 2 a.m. It was like in the wee hours of the morning.
Okay. You have a floodlight on the side of your house
Correct.
closest to Brandy, correct? At some point, did that light come on?
I don't remember. I know it came on when I went outside.
Okay.
To
And
kinda-
were you able to see or hear anything going
No.
on in Brandy's yard?
No,
It was just your dog alerting?
just the dog, yeah.
Okay. Was that abnormal for him?
It is, because Zeus was still a puppy, so he doesn't really make noise unless he hears something, or if someone triggers the light, or if another dog in the neighborhood barks, then he'll bark. But for the most part, that's why we kept him outside, because if it wasn't directly dealing between both neighbors' house where the fence line was, he relatively stayed quiet all the time.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
So you came home around 11 o'clock and you saw an SUV parked where?
On the side, we live at when you first come into the subdivision, there's a cul-de-sac, and then there's a road that continues for Saddle Creek Run. So most people, when you're visiting anyone, you don't pull into the driveway, you park on the side by the house.
Okay, so you're talking about the curb.
The curb.
So you're on the curb, you're talking about you saw an SUV on the curb in the vicinity of her house.
Correct. They were parked in between Brandy's house and my ex-husband and I house.
Okay. All right, don't know where the occupant of that car was in any way, shape, or form, correct?
No,
Okay. And that was around 11 o'clock,
correct,
and around 2 o'clock, the dog started barking.
correct.
Okay, and you don't know what the dog was barking at?
No,
I noticed you said tango, and you were basically using the alphabet. Were you military?
no.
Okay, all right, I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that whenever sound carries a long way at night, right? Things get a lot louder at night, so you don't want your dog out there barking and stuff.
That is correct. It was a quiet neighborhood.
Okay, quiet neighborhood, and you notice your dog barking when you're on the phone, right?
Correct.
You ever hear a gunshot?
No,
Did you hear 2 gunshots?
no,
10 gunshots?
no,
Didn't hear it at the time you saw the SUV. Didn't hear it at the time that Zeus was barking.
never heard a peep other than just the dog.
Okay. All right. No further questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Scott, you testified before during direct examination that you think that maybe the SUV was parked on the street in front of Ms. Peters' house. Is that what you were saying?
Well, there's not a lot of room in between the houses, per se. So the vehicle wasn't our guest. So anyone that's pulling, the vehicle wasn't our guest. So if someone was parking where the vehicle was parked, it would have been for Ms. Peters, because majority of the vehicle was in catty corner to her house.
Overruled. I'll let you cross.
Yeah, so just to clarify, you're saying today that the vehicle was in the road as opposed to in
No,
the-
it wasn't in the road. It was on the curb by her house.
Okay.
So if I can demonstrate, let's say this notch here is Brandy's house. My finger is my house. The vehicle was parked on the curb in front of Brandy's house.
Do you recall during earlier proceedings being asked the question, when you got home, did you notice any vehicles in Ms. Peters' driveway? And responding, off my recollection, there was like a white SUV in the driveway. Is that right?
Probably so. I mean, I'm medicated. I'm sorry. And 2, it's been a
Been a
couple
long
of
time.
years. It's been a
Yes.
long time, but I do remember there was still a white SUV
Okay.
there.
Would you say that your memory of the facts pertaining to that night was better further back in time than it is today?
Correct.
So we should defer to what you said earlier. in time.
Originally, correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
I'll let you cross on the location.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Oh, there we go.
All right, this is our road we're talking about?
That is correct.
Okay. And the house, where's your house at? Tell you what, right here.
Oh,
You got a little button right there at the top.
oh, thank you. If I'm remembering correctly, I want to say this is our house. Wait, no, because I planted
Wait-
one of these
Wait,
two.
wait till you get your thoughts straight before you start talking, because this lady's trying to take down what
I'm
you say,
sorry.
so you just be quiet till there's a question, okay? Right, so the question is, which is your house? Is that your house? Or are you certain? Which one is your house,
This one here.
okay?
I'm looking for the tree that I planted, but I don't know how updated or how old this diagram is. When we bought the house, I planted a tree here, which I don't, so I don't know if this is when the subdivision was originally built or if this is a more updated
And you're
picture.
saying, okay, hypothetically, this is your house.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the SUV?
It would have been here. I'm sorry.
On the street?
Well, it would have been, well, no, it wasn't in the driveway. It was here.
Okay.
It wasn't pulled up to the garage, it was like here.
All right. You don't have any idea what that car was involved with in any way, shape, or form, correct?
No,
Okay. Again, didn't hear any gunshots going off. at
No.
the time either of that thing.
no.
Houses are all close together here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a party, people are gonna park, if you had, multiple people there, 3 or 4 people cars, that they're gonna park obviously in your neighbors, adjacent to your neighbor's house, right?
Well, beautifully at that time, a lot of the neighbors in our subdevelopment were not college students. My ex-husband at the time was a sergeant for the Department of Juvenile Justice, and the neighbor directly across from us was also juvenile justice. Our neighbor to the left
Not a lot of
worked.
parties, is what you're saying.
It wasn't that type of neighborhood.
And by party, I don't mean necessarily like a.
Or get together,
I'm talking about
yeah.
people coming over.
Sorry. Get together, no. At that time, we pretty much, whenever we had any type of get-togethers, we would communicate with each other because we would ask, our neighbors if it was okay, if we could use their driveway or use their curb for any additional parking from visitors coming.
All right, but nobody contacted that, but you weren't home, correct?
Correct.
All right, so you did, well, again, you really don't know where that car was associated with. You know it was by your house, but again, didn't hear any gunshots associated with it.
No,
Okay. All right.
no gunshots. I'm very familiar with what a gunshot sounds like.
You are familiar with it?
I am. My ex-husband and I used to go to the gun range all the time.
Okay.
So,
Well, then let's have this. Get home at 11 o'clock. Hear any gunshots?
no,
Hear any gunshots until 2 o'clock in the morning when you're on the phone with your neighbor
no.
or with your friend?
My ex-husband came home around 4 o'clock that morning, and I was up until about 4:30 because I even told him about the dog barking. And I made the joke. I said, more than likely, one of the neighbors, are gonna call or called to complain about the dogs barking, but no gunshot.
No gunshots. Familiar
No.
with gunshots? Never heard
Right,
of them.
Mr. Fuchs, I didn't open it up for you to totally recross. That was a limited subject. Anything further, Mr. Prince?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Do we need to keep her any further?
No, sir.
All right. You're excused?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I should ask any juror have a question of this witness. I'm sorry, I forget sometimes. All right, go ahead. You can help Ms. Scott down. We want Washington next.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Come on in, sir. No, bring him in. Raise your right hand and be sworn, please, sir.
You swear affirm testimony about to give in this case to be truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, have a seat, please, sir. Slide on up a little bit further, if you would, please, sir.
Mr. Washington, can you please spell both your first and last
I'm
name?
not testifying.
State your name, please, sir.
Gregory Washington, but I'm not testifying.
Ask him a question, Mr. Prince.
Mr. Washington, back in 2010, at some point, did you have a criminal offense pending?
I'm not testifying.
All right, let the jury step out. Everybody be seated. Mr. Washington, you've already given this testimony once before, so what's the issue today?
You got me on live TV.
Well, you were on live TV last
I
time.
know I'm not testifying.
Well, you've already given this testimony once.
I'm not testifying.
All right.
I asked to speak, I spoke with Mr. Prince concerning this issue. I wrote him and I contacted his office and I explained to him my situation. I asked him to speak with him. I talked with people in his office. They know why I'm not testifying, but he still got me up here like this. Like I told him the first time, and I talked to him, and I talked to him again. He's know my situation. I told him I'm not testifying for a certain reason. Mr. Prince is aware of that, sir. It's not the point of that me refusing. I explained to him why. He should have addressed the court about this issue. But it's obvious that he did not address the court about this issue. So I don't know if he's doing it out of vindictive or whatever it is, but I wrote him and I talked with several people in his office. As a matter of fact, I talked to that lady right there, sitting right there, and I explained to him.
That's enough, Mr. Washington. How do you wish to proceed, Mr. Prince?
Your Honor, my position is that his former testimony could be admitted if it's essential. If the court is not going to require us to produce the former testimony, I would suggest that an acceptable alternative would just be to have the testimony come from Sergeant Basio instead.
Mr. Pugh?
Your Honor, my position is Mr. Washington's testimony has been previously available. It is available for both readback. It's also available for recording where they can actually see Mr. Washington. It has been subject to cross-examination and would request as far as his testimony goes that that would be the one that is replayed. If he's refusing to testify at this particular time, this prior testimony is certainly available and can be either read into the record or it can be shown via video to the jury.
All right. So nobody wants me to compel Mr. Washington?
That would be my preference, Your Honor, because there are things that Mr. Washington went into last time that I don't want to go into this time. Obviously, if the state has testimony they wish to elicit from him that's outside the scope of my direct, they can call back and do that. But I would prefer that he testify live about his knowledge of the out-of-court confession and how he got documented as a CI and what was said while he was doing the CI operation.
So why are you refusing to testify, Mr. Washington?
Mr. Prince know why I wrote him.
Well,
I
that
talked to
didn't
him.
ask Mr. Prince, I asked you.
It deals with
What's,
what was said last time and label me as a CI and all this other stuff, the trial and tribulation my family done went through and going through, and my name being put all in the newspaper and all on the news. It put a real bearing on my family members. And I explained to him my situation. He knows that if he had any concern about this situation, the client wanted me to testify. I asked him not to be testifying in front of the camera, but he chose not to do that.
well, we don't have the option of closing the courtroom. That's not
Well,
an option, Mr.
yeah.
Washington.
Well, I just said,
I'm not inclined to compel him. I think that's gonna cause more confusion than it's gonna help. You can use his prior testimony. I think there needs to be a predicate. Though probably hadn't considered how you were gonna do that at this point in time. Do you
But
have,
everything, Mr. Fuchs and I.
you can take him out.
thank you.
Mr. Fuchs and I have stipulated regarding Ms. Hawkins, another witness who's going to be unavailable, that we would pull her video from YouTube and then have the jurors follow along with the transcript. I'm not ready to do that right now, but that would be my proposal for dealing with Mr. Washington. I'll just change the order up. There's some time frame issue,
Let's have jury in, please. Jury? We still need one of them. Hold on, let's see.
Yes, sir.
I don't know. No, I don't.
All rise for the jury.
All right, if you face the clerk and see sworn, please.
Raise your right hand.
Yes, ma'am.
You swear affirm testimony about to give in this case be true, the whole truth, and nothing but true self you got.
So, yes.
All right, have a seat, slide that microphone, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't see a microphone.
What's that?
I don't see a microphone.
It's up there, if you just slide
Okay.
to the railing, it'll be there.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. May I proceed, Mr. Brandy?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Mount, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name?
Yes, my name is Darius Mount. First name is D-A-R-I-U-S. Mount, M-O-U-N-T.
And back in November of 2010, were you living over in the area of Saddle Creek Road?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And how was your house positioned to Brandy Peters' house?
I'm probably, I'd say about 3 or 4 houses down. Yeah, 3 or 4 houses down, and then I guess the street that I'm on runs perpendicular to the street that she's on, as far as I can, as far as how I'm explaining it, I guess.
Okay, so there's kind of a T, her road meets your road,
Right.
and you live right there?
Right.
Okay. About how far would you say your house was from hers?
I'd say maybe about a football field length.
Okay. At some point that evening, did you all hear a dog barking in a really vigorous manner?
Absolutely. It was definitely out of the ordinary.
And that's what I was going to ask you next. To your recollection, had you ever noticed a dog in your neighborhood barking quite that vigorously before?
No, around that time, I was a manager employed at Golden Corral, so I would come home around that time of night all the time. So, getting out of my car, and going into the house, it was always pretty quiet. What I was hearing that night was out of the ordinary.
Okay. How long well, I guess let me ask you this first. What time do you think you got home at?
Whew, it's been a while. I was at 2010. Honestly, I want to be honest.
Don't remember.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's been.
Would it refresh your recollection if I showed you your prior testimony?
That would help.
Just read it to yourself.
It would have been between just about 1:15.
Okay. Sounds about right. And was that roughly the time you would normally get home during that time frame?
Right around 1 a.m.
Okay. Was your wife already home when you got home?
She was.
Okay. And what did you all do about the barking dog?
I mean, if I remember correctly, I brought it to her attention, and then at some point we called the police.
So it was out of the ordinary enough that it made you think that summoning law enforcement was necessary.
Yeah, just to see what was going on. I mean, it was loud, so
And-
and it was different. It was
I'm sorry.
not what I'm used to.
That's what I was going to ask. That had never happened before. The dog had never been going crazy to the point where you guys were worried and called the police, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Mount, fair to say you have no idea what the dog was barking at?
No.
Whenever you would agree with me that sound travels a lot more at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning than it does at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, correct?
Right, I would agree.
Okay. Whenever you were drawing the attention to the dog, did you pull in your garage, or how did you get into your house?
I go through the front door. I don't pull into my garage.
When you got out of your car, you could hear the dog barking at that point?
I did.
Okay. When you walked into your house, could you hear the dog barking?
I could.
Did you go back outside and listen to the dog barking?
I believe so with my wife. If I remember, like, I think we kind of talked about if it was like too much of an extreme to like call the cops or whatever. But I think after I talked to her, if I remember correctly, because it's been so long, we were like, it's a little weird. Let's call the cops.
You go outside and see if maybe you could hear anything else going on, give an explanation as to why the dog was barking.
No, I think at that point it was, I don't have no S on my chest, so I'm taking it on in.
Fair enough. Did you, when you got out of your car and walked in the door and heard the dog barking, did you hear any gunshots?
No.
Did you hear 1 gunshot?
No, sir.
You hear 2 gunshots?
No.
You hear 10 gunshots?
No.
When you walked outside and you heard the dog with your wife, did you hear 1 gunshot?
No.
2 gunshots?
No.
10 gunshots?
No.
When you were inside the home, you could hear the dog barking. You would agree with me that gunshots are a little bit louder than a dog barking.
We can touch and agree on that.
I'm sorry?
I said we can touch and agree. Unless they had a silencer or something. I don't know.
Okay. Unless there's a suppressor, right?
Right.
You would agree then that when you were inside your house, you could hear the dog barking. You didn't hear 1 gunshot?
No.
Didn't hear 2 gunshots?
No, sir.
Didn't hear 10 gunshots?
Absolutely not.
All right, no further questions.
Redirect. Any juror have a question of this witness? If not, you can step down. We need to keep him further.
No, Your Honor, he can be excused. Nothing to take, Your Honor.
All right, you're free to go. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You have another witness available, Mr. Brandy?
Yes, sir, Your Honor. At this time, the defense will call Marcus Davis.
You would face the clerk on each one, please.
Raise your right hand. You swear affirm testimony you about to give in this case will be true, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You have a seat right at the railing, please, sir. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Davis, can you please state and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
Marquise Davis, Marquis Davis.
And where were you living back in November of 2010?
901 Saddle Creek Run.
Where was that relative to Brandy Peters' house?
Not directly across the street, like parallel across from.
Right straight across the street. Who did you live there with?
My son's mom, Cicely Timmons.
And she goes by Cece, is that right?
Yes.
Cece was like Brandy's best friend at the time, correct?
Yeah, they hung out every day.
Okay. And it would be common for you to make all of the kids, well, let me clarify that. So the twins, Javante, they would come over to y'all's house and play with your kids regularly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And would it be a common occurrence for you to make all of the kids dinner?
Pretty much I could pretty much every day.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to the evening of November 19th, 2010. Were you cooking that night?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall what you were making?
Oxtails, rice. I'm not sure the whole meal, but I know I cooked oxtails that day.
Okay. And at some point, did Javante, Tamaya, and Tanaya come over and eat at your house?
Yes, sir.
You recall about what time that was?
Around 6:37.
Okay. And how long did they stay there and eat for?
Maybe 30 minutes.
I'm sorry?
Maybe 30, 45 minutes, 30 minutes.
Okay, so they started eating at 6:37, took about half an hour, so they would have finished up around 7:30?
Yeah.
Okay. What about Brandy? Did you send in any food over for Brandy to eat?
Yes, sir.
What time do you think that was at?
When the kids finished up eating.
It's about 7:30? Okay. Did you send that plate of food over with one of the twins, or did you take it over there yourself?
I sent it with the kids.
Okay. At some point, did you make a plate of food and drive it up north to the north side of town where your dad lived?
Yes, sir.
And what time did you get back?
Between 8:30, like 8:30, before 9 o'clock.
Okay. And when you returned, did you see a vehicle in Brandy Peters' driveway?
Yes, sir.
What kind of vehicle was it?
A black or dark blue Suburban.
Okay. Now, have you ever met Mr. Segura?
No.
You knew who he was, though?
I mean, I know him. I grew up in Tallahassee. I mean, I don't, you know.
Okay. Were you familiar with his green truck?
Yes, I seen his truck before.
You and Mr. Segura, did you know each other at all?
No, sir.
Do you know each other at all now?
I mean, yeah.
How's that?
I mean, I know him from this case, and, I seen him coming back and forth from Brandy house.
So you were familiar with who he was back then?
Yeah, I knew, and, I know who he was, yeah.
Okay. But you guys weren't like friends or anything, correct?
No, sir.
All right. What about your relationship with Brandy? Were you friends with Brandy too?
I knew her before she moved over there, because I had a cousin that used to date her when her twins were young. She didn't even have Devontae then.
All right. And how about your relationship with the kids? You've indicated you would make them dinner occasionally.
I mean, yeah, they played with my son. They were the same age. Well, Devontae was the same age as my son.
Okay. So kind of a, community caretaker. You would take care of her kids, and she'd do the same sometimes?
Pretty much.
Okay. As far as Mr. Segura goes, you didn't have any relationship with him whatsoever?
No, sir.
Okay. But you were familiar with his truck?
Yes, sir.
And the vehicle that you're referring to that you saw in her driveway at 8:30 or so, the dark colored SUV, that was not Mr. Segura's truck, correct?
No, I had never seen it before.
You'd never seen that vehicle before?
No.
Thank you. No further questions. Mr. Davis, you said something about the food. You cooked food for the kids?
Yes, sir.
Did you do so on that night?
Did I what?
Cook food for them that night?
Yes, I mean, I cooked for my family, but, they were there, so,
Well, what time was it that the kids came over?
like I said, 6:30, 7 o'clock.
Isn't it true, Mr. Davis, that the first time that you told anybody this was actually back in 2017? You never told law enforcement any of this the night or the day they were out there investigating stuff?
No, I didn't.
Okay. You never walked up to them and said, hey, by the way, I saw them that night that they supposedly were murdered?
No.
Got law enforcement all over the place asking questions of your son, asking questions of CC. You didn't say anything, did you?
No, but at the time when that happened, I was working a lot, and, I wasn't home like that.
Wasn't home that way, that night, like that?
I wasn't home like that. I worked a lot. I was working at Sonny's. I was a manager at Sonny's Barbecue. I worked a lot.
Didn't tell law enforcement, hey, by the way, I saw a car in the driveway at 8 o'clock that evening that could have been involved in this homicide of a woman and 3 kids that was friends with your wife and her and your son.
I didn't know it was relevant at the time.
Didn't know it was relevant that a car was sitting in the driveway, supposedly, at a homicide scene the night of the homicide.
I didn't know it was relevant at the time.
Mr. Davis, Artron Timmons is your son you're talking about, correct?
Stepson.
Okay. And Mr. Timmons has come in here and told us that,
Sustained.
so you didn't give every statement to law enforcement on that particular day, correct?
No, I didn't.
What you're testifying to has to do with stuff that now you're, one moment. But the bottom line is, law enforcement's all over there investigating murder of a woman, her 3 kids, friends with your wife, friends with your son. You've seen them at your house before. You cooked dinner for them, and you didn't feel the need to tell anybody any of this information back then, correct?
I mean, I thought that, everybody knew that they was at my house. It wasn't for me to tell that they was at my house. I thought everybody knew that they was already at the house.
But you're the only one who saw the car,
I believe so.
the supposed car.
I
Didn't
seen
tell
it.
anybody about that, did you?
Like I said, that part I didn't know was relevant at the time.
No further questions.
Mr. Timmons, I'm sorry, Mr. Davis, did you have any knowledge that there was an issue with time of death following the murders?
No, sir, I never knew.
Okay. And you weren't home when law enforcement was canvassing the neighborhood looking for witnesses on the 20th?
No.
Okay. Was there any reason, or is there any reason why you didn't come forward, in the weeks or months following the murder and volunteer to law enforcement the information you had beyond that you didn't know it was relevant?
I didn't know it was relevant. That's the only reason.
Okay.
I found out about my seeing the SUV that was relevant when the investigators came and talked to me.
When the defense investigators found
Yeah.
you? That was the first time anybody had questioned you about this
Yes,
case,
sir.
correct? Thank you. No further questions.
Any jurors have a question of this witness? All right, you can step down. We need to keep it any further?
No, we can be released, Your Honor.
You need to release.
No, no,
You're excused. Call your next witness.
this time the defense will call Cicely Timmons.
Call who?
CC Timmons. All right, we approach, just to make sure we're on the same page about an exhibit.
Testimony about to give in this case, will you truth, whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Timmons, can you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name's Cicely Timmons, CIESLY-TIMMONS.
And who was Brandy Peters to you back in November 2010?
She was my neighbor and my friend.
How long had y'all been friends for?
Oh, just a couple of months, like 6 months.
In that amount of time, had y'all gotten pretty close?
Yeah, we was cool.
You'd be together during the day a lot of times,
When we dropped the kids off, for the most part, yeah.
and you would help each other taking care of each other's kids.
I mean, we both wasn't working. We would drop our kids off the daycare and come back. But, I mean, in the evening times, the kids would play together, but
Okay.
not babysitting.
And were you with Brandy at various points during the day on, was it Thursday or Friday that you were with her?
I think it was Thursday.
Okay, Thursday. You were with Brandy throughout the day on Thursday then?
I believe so.
Okay. At some point that day, and I don't want you to go into content, but at some point that day, did Brandy Peters come over to your house with a letter that she had received that
Yes.
day? May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Let the record reflect, I'm going to show the witness what will be marked for identification as defense 16. Can you tell me whether you recognize this envelope? You can pick it up and look at it.
Yeah,
Do you recognize that?
yeah.
What is it?
It's in the envelope that the letter came in that she brought to my house.
Brandy had that with her?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it a true and accurate depiction of the envelope that she showed you that day?
Yes.
Here, at this time, I would move to admit what's been pre-marked as defense 16 into evidence as defense 16.
Any further objection?
Nothing further, Your Honor, other than what's already been stated.
To be admitted.
Ms. Timmons, when Ms. Peters came over, and I don't want you to tell us what your conclusions were about her attitude or mood, but can you describe physically what you saw Brandy acting like?
She was scared.
Again, I don't want your conclusion about it. I'd like to ask you about what you observed. How did you observe Brandy acting?
Nervous.
Why do you say that?
I mean, she clearly was nervous because of the letter.
And who was that letter from?
Carlos Santos.
Did you have a chance yourself to look at the letter and see what
Yes.
was written on the outside of it?
Yeah.
Did Brandy indicate what, if any, portion of the outside of the envelope had concerned her?
Not
Yeah,
that I
call for hearsay.
recall.
Overruled.
Not that I recall.
Okay, it was just the letter itself, or the
Yeah.
envelope itself that you said was making her act nervous?
Yeah.
Okay. And you read it too, read the envelope too as well, correct?
Yes.
All right. How did you feel when you read the letter?
Your Honor.
Not the letter, I'm sorry.
Sustained, that's relevant.
Well, let me ask you this. During prior proceedings, you were subpoenaed by the state, and a material witness warrant had to be secured in order to force you to appear, correct?
Yeah.
Well, why was that?
Because I was scared.
And to be clear, you weren't scared at all of Mr. Segura, anybody?
Didn't know anything about him.
So,
No.
no is the answer to that
No.
question, right? You weren't scared of Mr. Segura or
No.
anyone connected to Mr. Segura?
No.
Okay. That day, on the 19th, did you see the kids at all that day, the twins and Javante?
Not on the 19th. It had to be the 18th.
Okay. And when they came over and ate oxtail stew at your house that night, you weren't out there with them,
No,
right?
I
You
was.
were in the back bedroom?
Yes.
So you can't offer any testimony about that?
No.
Okay. No further questions for the witness at this time.
Well,
Ms. Timmons talking about the kids. They had come over and eaten, and you actually texted Brandy and asked her whether she wanted any of that oxtail soup, correct?
I texted Brandy and asked her if she wanted something to eat, but I can't tell you what she. I didn't state in details what it was to eat, so I can't actually tell you if it was the oxtail soup or not.
Okay. And that was actually before 7 o'clock, right?
It was when I reread it. It was 6:53.
Okay. All right, no further questions. Hold on one second. She told you that she didn't want any food, right?
Yeah, she did say she didn't want
Okay.
any food
So
in
no,
the text.
you didn't see her or the kids? at
No,
that
I didn't
point?
see her. The text said no, she was good.
They were already back. They were at their house, correct?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. No further questions this time.
read I've been in and out, and y'all been in and out, it gets a little confusing sometimes. We'll take 10 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Either side need anything?
No, Your Honor. 37 long audio where there's one line that can be heard, that the one that you will testify to, I understand that, but there's nothing audible on there that puts it in any kind of context in any way, shape, or form, absent the testimony and prior foundation being made by Gregory Washington, which we don't have, which we had last time. But because of it's such a brief, again, there's one line that's being heard out of this entire context. It takes it out of context, and I believe at this point, it's probative outweighs.
Let's have a jury. We don't need a proper, get Blasio.
Yes.
All right, y'all ready? We'll, all rise for the jury.
Ready to be seated, please. Note the witness, if you would face the clerk to be sworn, please.
You swear affirm testimony you about to give in this case will be true, the whole truth, and nothing but true, so help you God.
I do.
All right, have a seat. Slide up to the railing, please. May proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant Bossy, can you spell your first and last name for the court reporter?
My name is Vincent, V as in Victor, I-N-C-E-N-T, last name Bossio, B as in boy, O-C-C-I-O.
And you're employed by Tallahassee Police Department, right?
That's correct.
What were you doing for TPD back in 2010?
I was assigned to the homicide unit.
Okay, and now you're a sergeant, correct?
Lieutenant.
A lieutenant. See, I was right. So you're a lieutenant now, so you oversee divisions within TPD. You don't do the investigation yourself now.
That's correct. I'm a patrol watch commander at nighttime.
Okay. Back in 2010, what role did you play in this case?
I was a support investigator. Again, I was assigned to the homicide unit. The primary investigator gets assigned the case, and then we are tasked with many jobs, and we help out with interviews, collecting evidence, and everything like that.
Okay. So Mark Lewis was the lead investigator, right?
That's correct.
And so you and other homicide investigators were providing support, correct?
Yes.
All right. At some point, did you decide to investigate a potential target named Demario Paramore and also Haywood Griffin?
That's correct.
And what investigative steps did you take to that end?
We gathered information that.
Don't go into what you gathered, please, sir.
Okay. The two individuals were a target of our investigation for having participated in the homicide. And we conducted a search warrant on their residence and ultimately were able to interview them.
Okay. And in order to facilitate collection of evidence, did you at some point document a confidential informant?
I did.
Okay. And affix the confidential informant with a wire?
Yes.
And sent him out into the community under your supervision to talk to Demario Paramore, right?
That's correct.
So when he had these interaction with Demario Paramore, he was wearing your wire and you could listen to what he was saying, correct?
Yes.
You could hear both Mr. Paramore and the confidential informant?
Correct.
Okay. While the confidential informant was talking to Mr. Paramore, did Mr. Paramore allude to the fact that he had some participation in the murders of Brandy Peters and her children?
He did make a statement, yes.
Okay. And during the same conversation with the confidential informant, Mr. Paramore explained the reason for killing the children as you don't leave any witnesses, dead men don't talk, correct?
That's what he said.
Okay. So you indicated that Mr. Paramore and Mr. Griffin were subsequently arrested once y'all executed search warrants, right?
Yes.
And ultimately they ended up getting arrested, indicted on other stuff not related to this murder, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you did a custodial interview with Mr. Paramore, correct?
I sustain the hearsay objection at this point.
As the statements made by
Yes.
Mr. Paramore? Okay. I'm going to ask you about some follow-up investigation, and I don't want to go into what Mr. Paramore actually said, okay?
Okay.
Were you provided alibi witnesses for,
Object that calls for the
Overruled.
were you provided names of alibi witnesses that could place Mr. Paramore away from the murders during the time when that happened?
Yes.
Okay. And were you provided some information about a cell phone that Mr. Paramore was using at the time?
Correct.
Okay. And ultimately, did you get a buccal swab from Mr. Paramore?
Yes.
Okay. Now, following your interview with Mr. Paramore, did you follow up by going and doing interviews with any of those listed or named alibi witnesses?
He provided his wife and child.
Okay.
So unfortunately, no, we did not.
Okay. And as far as the buccal swab goes, well, let me just clarify this. You talked to him in March of 2011, is that right?
That's correct.
And the buccal swab wasn't ultimately sent off to FDLE until 2016, right?
That's correct.
And that was following me kind of giving you a hard time at a deposition about not having followed up on that investigative lead, correct?
It was done after the deposition, yes.
Right. Similarly, with respect to Mr. Paramore's cell phone or potential cell phone information, that was something that ended up not getting passed along to Sergeant Corbett, right? So no records were ever requested during the investigative phase of the case for Mr. Paramore?
On his current cell phone that he was using, yes, court orders were done on that cell phone.
Subsequent to this, right?
Correct.
Okay. Is the reason that you didn't follow up on those investigative leads, talking to alibi witnesses or sending off a buccal swab to FDLE or getting phone records contemporaneous with your investigation into these murders, that you basically felt that Mr. Paramore was full of it as it pertained to his confession?
After the interview with Mr. Paramore, it was evident through the cooperation and things that he provided that he was not the person that we were looking at.
So yes, without any corroboration, you basically just had a feeling that he was full of it when he confessed. Is that fair to say?
No. Again, we did corroborate a lot of evidence through cell phone records. There was plenty of court orders done, including his girlfriend's, everyone that was on Brandy Peters' cell phone. So all those cell sites and court orders, they were done prior to. That's the reason why, at the end of the interview, that we decided that he was not our main suspect.
Cooperation, not that you felt he was full of it? That he was cooperative, I mean to say, not that you personally felt he was full of it?
He was cooperative, that's correct.
Okay. Do you recall in your deposition being asked, so if his DNA, which you provided, is never compared to exclude him as a witness, and his cell phone data is never obtained to exclude him as a witness, and none of his alibi witnesses are ever questioned to exclude him as a witness, how is he so easily dismissed after having confessed? And if it's just as simple as you've been doing this forever, and you could tell based on your interview that he was obviously full of it, that's fine. I just want to know how he was so easily, and you interrupted and said, yeah. I said, that's pretty much it. And you said, that pretty much sums it up. Do you recall that?
Yes.
So it was essentially based on the fact that you simply felt he was full of it, correct?
The totality of the circumstances, yes.
Thank you. No further questions for witness.
Let's talk about this alleged confession. First and foremost, who was it that said that he allegedly confessed? The person that you wired up?
Who the confidential informant was?
Yeah.
It was Gregory Washington.
Gregory Washington. You have a history with Gregory Washington, do you not?
Yes.
And is that a good history?
No.
Not from arrest and everything like that as a confidential informant. He's been proven to be unreliable, has he not?
That is correct.
And in fact, the only reason that he was utilizing this is because we're investigating the homicide of 3 children and Brandy Peters, correct?
Yes.
So took extraordinary measures in using a confidential informant that we normally wouldn't do, correct?
That is correct.
In this particular case, Gregory Washington.
Yes.
Okay. As I said, Gregory Washington isn't known for his, in the law enforcement community, utilizing him as a confidential informant. He's not one we would normally use because of his unreliability. That's correct?
That's correct.
In this audio recording that we're talking about, it's actually 37 minutes long, is it not?
Yes.
And you're able to hear and monitor along those things, along the lines, correct?
Yes.
But isn't it true that you really couldn't hear anything other than Greg Washington talking for almost the entirety of the, and quite frankly, badgering Mr. Paramore?
He was definitely pushing the conversation, but yes, he monopolized almost the entire time.
Okay. And eventually, Mr. Paramore basically just says the kids were killed because dead men don't talk.
Yes.
Okay. I think we can agree that is why the children were killed, because that way they could not witness who actually killed, correct?
I agree, yes.
So what he's saying isn't in fact inaccurate facts, correct?
That's correct.
Nothing along that audio in any way, shape, or form did Mr. Paramore say that he was the one that did the killing.
That's correct.
Okay. And in fact, once again, Mr. Paramore, Mr. Washington is the only one that even remotely got this thing started in the first place.
Yes, sir.
One moment. When we talk about Mr. Washington being unreliable, isn't it true that, quite frankly, me at the state attorney's office forbid him to be used as a confidential informant because of his unreliability?
That's also correct.
And you and Mr. Campbell actually came to me and asked permission to use him once again despite that order, correct?
That is correct.
And we again made the exception because of the fact that we're talking about the deaths of 3 children and Miss Peters.
Yes, sir.
And again, you said the totality of the circumstances, including the cooperation of Mr. Paramore, limited him as a suspect.
Yes.
Cell phone records eliminated him and Griffin. There was no communication between them and Brandy Peters' cell phone, correct?
Correct.
Nothing that could be determined that they would have any kind of grudge against or motive for Miss Peters' murder or the children's murder for that matter.
That's correct.
Okay. And that buccal swab was in fact gotten.
Yes.
Many years later, it was gotten.
Yes.
And actually has come back as not present, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions. Redirect.
I want to clarify a couple of things. So you said his buccal swab was sent off to FDLE following your deposition, and isn't it true that the profile developed from his buccal swab was only compared to, I think, one of the hundreds of evidentiary exhibits? Is that right?
I have no idea on that part.
Fair enough. I want to ask you specifically, because although the audio is inaudible, you could actually hear what was being said throughout the entire interaction between confidential informant and target, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so when Mr. Fuchs asked you a minute ago, there wasn't any statement specifying that Mr. Paramore was involved, that wasn't accurate, correct? Mr. Paramore specifically alluded to the fact that he had some participation in the murders. Is that true?
Again, he didn't say he, but he did end up saying that statement that we talked about.
You wrote a police report, right?
Yes.
Do you recall writing in your police report, Paramore alluded to the fact that he had some participation in these murders?
Based on the statement, yes, sir.
Right, that's what I was asking.
Okay, but yeah.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you decided to use Gregory Washington, notwithstanding the fact that he's generally unreliable?
Yeah, because of the crime that happened and how Mr. Fuchs just said, we're talking about 3 kids and a mother that was murdered here. We wanted to make sure that we used every possible resource at our disposal, and we wanted to make sure that we covered everything so we could make sure that we could confirm or deny who the main suspect is. And in fact, in the end, we ended up doing that.
Okay. Part of the way that you were able to deal with Mr. Washington's established unreliability is having him on the wire so that you could hear what was being said, right?
That's correct.
So you didn't have to rely on Mr. Washington's assertions. You could hear for yourself what was being said.
Yes.
May we approach real quick? No further questions for the witness.
All right, juror, have a question of this witness? All right, if not, you may step down.
Thank you.
We need to keep it any further.
Yes, Your Honor.
Remain under rule, please.
Yes, sir.
Your next witness.
Yeah, at this time, Your Honor, the defense would call John Sawicki.
We better go sidebar. If you face the clerk, please, please.
Swear affirm testimony about giving this case to be true, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God.
I do.
Have a seat, slide up the rail, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Sawicki, can you please state your name and spell both your first and last name for the court reporter?
John Sawicki, John Sawicki.
And what do you do for a living?
I am a forensic computer scientist and electronic evidence consultant.
What does that mean exactly?
Essentially what that means is I dig through electronic devices, computers, cell phones, cell phone records, attempt to determine what the user's done with the device, document what I find, prepare to testify about it later.
And to be able to do that, did you have to undergo any specialized education or training?
I did.
Tell us about that.
I have a law degree from Florida State University. I have a master's degree in digital forensics from the University of Central Florida. I've got a graduate certificate in computer forensics from the University of Central Florida. I've got somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 or 700 hours of specialized training in computer and cell phone forensics, interpreting call detail records, general training in how cell tower networks operate from a variety of different providers, generally private sector companies that provide either hardware or software packages to law enforcement and to corporate entities. I've also done graduate level coursework in the area of radio frequency engineering through the University of California, San Diego's extension program.
Okay, and have you previously been qualified to testify as an expert as it pertains to interpretation of call detail records and other records of the same sort?
I have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 or 70 times in state and federal court across the country.
Okay. Are you also a bar attorney?
I am. I'm admitted to practice law in the state of Florida.
I guess I should clarify. When I say barred, I don't mean prohibited, I mean you're a member of the bar. Is that right?
It is. That's correct.
Okay. Have you likewise written peer-reviewed articles?
I don't know that any of my articles have actually been peer-reviewed. I've certainly written articles that have been published in legal journals, but I don't think any of them actually gone through the peer review process.
Okay.
Your Honor, at this point, I would tend to the witness.
Any word out?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
I want to just ask you about any analysis that you would have done in this case relative to Mr. Segura's 408 number, 850-408 number, during the afternoon and evening hours of November 19th, 2010.
Yes, sir. That would have been the 8669 number?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And did you have an opportunity to review all of Mr. Segura's records for that phone during that time frame?
I did review the call detail report, the RTT report. Yes, sir.
Tell the jury what each of those things are.
Sure. When you get records from a cell phone carrier, you typically get a number of documents that are fairly similar across all the carriers, but not necessarily identical. The call detail report is a pretty standard report, though they're not necessarily identical from carrier to carrier. It'll usually contain an event-by-event listing of the phone calls, potentially text messages, potentially data transmissions, the dates and times of those events, the details of who is contacting who, that is by phone number, for those particular events for whatever period the report is collected for. The RTT report is it's much more of an engineering focused report, has a lot of engineering details to it. But some of the more important ones that you've kind of heard about a little bit in this case are let me take a step back. RTT stands for round trip timing. So one of the more important pieces of that is a component that attempts to establish the range to tower distance for different events as they transpire. I believe that's the two reports that we discussed.
Okay. And in reviewing those records, did you also review the records compiled by the Tallahassee Police Department as it relates to the dummy phone, the duplicate phone that they use to try and establish distance to tower error ranges?
Yeah, this was a sample phone that the Tallahassee Police Department went out and purchased and made a series of phone calls, text messages, data transmissions, and I did have a chance to review the RTT report for that phone as well.
Okay. And based on your review of all the records, were you able to draw any conclusions as it pertains to the distance to tower information pertained and the sector information pertaining to Mr. Segura's 408 phone?
I mean, you can draw a number of conclusions about the data itself and to the interpretation of that data.
Okay. And I guess let me ask you about the process utilized by the Tallahassee Police Department to try and determine error range. Well, I guess let me back up and ask this. Why was the distance to tower data accumulated in the first place by these various carriers? What was the science behind that, and what's the purpose behind that?
So the science behind that data is essentially around a range timing function. If you're familiar with time, rate, distance calculations, you know that if you're going to drive from here to Jacksonville, that it should take you about 3 hours if you drive at 60 miles an hour. You can do that function and determine about how far it is if you've got all three numbers, time, rate, and distance. It's a very similar calculation that the carriers use when they're trying to determine the range to tower distance in how long it takes a signal to go from the from the tower to the handset back to the tower. And there are a number of factors that can certainly impact that, but you can calculate out how long that should take, and it works pretty well until, like in the vehicle idea, how long it'd take you to drive to Jacksonville, somebody has to stop to go to the bathroom, or you have to get gas or something like that. Something gets in the way of that calculation and causes it to be off a little bit. Well, the same thing happens in the phones, in that you can have a number of different things happen within the transmission from the tower to the phone and back. You can have something called reflection or refraction, which causes the signal to take a variety of different paths from the tower to the phone and throws off that timing. You can have a latency effect within the device itself, how long it takes that signal once it receives it for it to send that signal back to the tower. And so that can throw off that timing distance. And as we saw, the range to tower distance is pretty much never exactly correct.
Okay. And in general, what kind of error range are we talking about?
So it really just kind of depends in the, I believe the Tallahassee Police Department made somewhere around 60, created somewhere around 60 events, and that would be phone calls, text messages, data transmissions, in an attempt to recreate what they thought had transpired with the phone. And in all of those transmissions, I believe that there were about 88% of them that were off by more than 1/10 of a mile. And in some cases, they're off by as much as 1.5 miles or even a little bit more than that.
Okay. Did you walk through each of the communications between, say, 13:41 or 1:41 p.m. and the 8:21 communication from Mr. Segura's 408 phone number?
I did.
Okay. And did you develop maps to use to demonstrate to the jury which towers and which sectors his phone was communicating with during that time frame?
I did.
All right. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may. For identification, this is going to be defense composite exhibit 5A through 5U. Do you recognize that?
Those are the maps I developed.
And can you look through and tell me whether they're a true and accurate depiction of the maps you developed?
They do appear to be.
Okay. At this time, Your Honor, I would request to move into evidence with pre-mark as defense composite exhibit 5A through 5U into evidence as defense composite.
Any objection? No, be admitted.
Request permission to publish, Your Honor.
You may.
First, let's talk about the communication which took place from Mr. Segura's 408 phone at 13:41:08. This is 5A. What does this map depict?
So this shows, number one, the two locations that were of concern when I was doing this analysis. 908 Saddle Creek Run, which, as we know, where the incident occurred. 401 Gale Avenue, which I believe is Mr. Segura's sister's residence. And I can't quite read the upper left-hand corner. It's got some information up there that includes the range to tower distance. From Tower 847, there's a dark line right through the middle of that cell sector, and that is the range to tower distance that was reported in the RTT report.
So what does the blue arc represent?
There's actually, and unfortunately this doesn't show up very well on the overhead, but there's actually two blue arcs within there. You've got a smaller blue arc that appears immediately around that range to tower line, and then you have a broader blue section through the sector that is a little wider there. The narrow section reflects the average range to tower deviation, which I believe was somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.20 miles. For this sector, 847, this is a long, the second part of that is a longer error range, which reflects the greater deviation that we were seeing amongst that data of 0.61 miles, plus or minus.
And we actually saw instances in looking at the communications from Mr. Segura's phone, which would indicate there was quite a bit of deviation over short periods of time, correct? Specifically, I'll refer to the two communications which occurred 7 seconds apart at 7:23 p.m., just as an example. How far was the reported distance deviated between those two 7-second apart communications?
I'm actually going to have to check the records to refer to that. I don't remember the exact distance, but it was a little over a mile, as I recall.
Okay. So, needless to say, it's impossible that the handset traveled that amount of distance in that amount of time.
Yeah, I recall that we checked the speed it would require to move that distance, and it was something in the neighborhood of 300 miles an hour.
So, it's safe to say the phone's not traveling that fast. It reflects that there can be, based on, like you say, a variety of factors, significant deviation.
Yeah, it's a system that there are unfortunately other factors that come into play with that signaling information that causes it to be less than precise.
Okay. And this communication that takes place at 13:41:08, which is 1:41 p.m., this arc is depicting Sector 1 from Tower 847, which is down here, correct?
That's correct.
And so if a handset is close to the sector line right here, that's the rough line that separates Sector 1 from Sector 2 for Tower 847, correct?
It's not nearly that neat in practice,
Right.
but yeah, that is the general area where that handoff is going to happen if you're moving from Sector 1 to Sector 2. In practice, though, I mean, there's really no other way to to draw it out theoretically, but in practice, it's not going to be a nice, neat line like that. It's going to be more of a jagged edge.
Based on environmental factors and all kinds of stuff, correct?
That's correct. You're going to have radio frequencies getting blocked by, different things that happen to be in the way. Cars, trucks, houses, hills, any kind of obstacle like that can cause a shadow, essentially. It's not unlike holding a flashlight. Things that come in front of that are going to cause a shadow from the beam. And it's the same with the transmission of energy from the cell tower.
As a general principle, as you go closer to the theoretical sector line right there, you could be in a fixed location, but over multiple communications, the records may reflect that you're jumping between Sector 2 and Sector 1, correct?
Yeah, there's certainly not a hard line there where you're just going to have coverage from Sector 1 and just have coverage from Sector 2. Simply as a matter of a function of how the networks operate, you have to have overlap built in, or when you hit that wall, you're going to drop the call.
Okay. Similarly, if you're closer to the center of a particular sector, your handset is far more likely to only communicate with that particular sector, correct?
As you move towards the center of a sector, you're going to be in the strongest portion of the beam, which I guess is going to make it more likely that you're going to connect with that tower. But I can't say it would only be that tower, except from that, that sector, except from that tower. There certainly are surrounding sectors and towers that could come into play as well.
And just as a general principle, I understand you're saying there's a variety of factors, but as a general principle, your handset will communicate with the sector of a particular tower that is facing the handset, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Based on your calculated error ranges for this communication taking place at 13:41, which is 1:08 p.m. on November 19th, is Mr. Segura's 408 handset at a location consistent with 401 Gale Avenue?
It is.
Okay. Next one is a communication taking place at 1:54 p.m. with tower 847 at a distance of 1.06 miles. This is 5B. Same kind of map we're looking at there. Is the location of Mr. Segura's 408 handset for that communication likewise consistent with being at 401 Gale Avenue?
It is, yes.
Okay. Next one is at 2:12 p.m. For 14:12 and 48 seconds. Again, for sector 847, for tower 847, sector 1 at a distance of 1.03 miles. And this is 5C. For this map is the reported distance from tower as well as the sector being communicated with, consistent with the handset being at 401 Gale Avenue.
It is, yes.
D is a communication that took place at 2:13 and 37 seconds. It's tower 847, sector 1 at a distance of 0.95 miles. Is Mr. Segura's handset for this communication, does it appear to be in a location consistent with 401 Gale Avenue?
It does.
It's going to be the same question, of course, for a communication, the next one taking place at 2:20 p.m. and 12 seconds, communicating with tower 847, sector 1 at a distance of 1.06 miles. According to the records, is the tower, sector, and distance from tower data reported for Mr. Segura's 408 phone consistent with the handset being located at 401 Gale Avenue?
It is.
Again, at 14:27, that's 2:27 and 51 seconds. We're talking about tower 847 still, sector 1, 0.93 miles, distance to tower. Is the handset information being reported in the records, does it place the handset at a location consistent with 401 Gale Avenue?
Yes.
And just to be clear, all of these these are Sector 1. None of them are line jumping to Sector 2, correct? The ones we've covered so far.
Correct.
Okay. Great. 5G is the next communication at 15:05, 25 seconds. It's Tower 847, Sector 1 at a distance of 1.04 miles. And again, here is the location reported consistent with 401 Gale Avenue.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is that, that's 3:05 p.m., is that right?
It was 15:05, yes, sir.
Okay. And I guess I should ask you this as well. For all of these, we're seeing both 401 Gale Avenue and 908 Saddle Creek Run. Both are showing up in the ARC for all these communications, is that right?
Yes, sir.
So is there any way to discern whether a handset is located at either one as opposed to the other of these two locations?
Yeah, I don't think you can exclude either one of those.
How about for 1558, still communicating with Sector 1? Is the handset still at a location that is consistent with 401 Gale Avenue as well as 908 Saddle Creek?
Yes, sir.
All right. And I guess I should ask this. Not pictured on this map is another location close to Brandy Peters' house, the church parking lot, right?
That's correct.
That's likewise now, we're talking about it, 1558, that's within this ARC as well, correct?
I believe it is, yes, sir.
Next one is at 1700 and 57 seconds. This is still Tower 847, Sector 1 at a distance of 1.11 miles. Is the handset location being reported based on the records consistent with either one of those or both of those, I guess is the better way to ask the question, consistent with either or both of those locations?
Yeah, I believe it is.
As well as the church parking lot as well?
Yes, sir.
And that's 1700 is 5 o'clock, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, next one is at 1745. This is a different tower being communicated with, correct? This is Tower 849?
That's correct.
At a distance of 2.54 miles?
Yes, sir.
But the arc looks relatively similar. So both 401 Gale Avenue as well as 908 Saddle Creek as well as the church parking lot are still within the error range for this communication, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 5K, this is 1801, which is 601, correct?
That's correct.
This is a different tower again, Tower 851, Sector 1 at a distance of 3.98 miles. Any particular reason why a handset would communicate with towers that are farther away?
So if you think about this as we're getting later in the day, what's happening is a lot of people are going home from work, starting to use their phones in their residences rather than in their offices, other places like that. And so for residential neighborhoods, like we may be seeing there, it's putting a heavier load on the towers. For networks like Verizon's, you get an effect that's called cell breathing. And that is the more devices across the tower at a particular time, the less power each of those devices is going to get, so it shortens up that range. So one of the things that could be causing that is you may be seeing that effect for more powerful towers south of town to be filling in when those residential areas, when the towers in those residential areas start to see more volume.
And again, for this communication, both of the locations we're talking about, 401 Gale Avenue and 908 Saddle Creek, they're both within the error range for that tower, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next one's at 6:05 p.m. or 18:05. This is it's communicating again now with Tower 847, Sector 1 at a distance of 1.08 miles. And again, we see both of the locations we're talking about depicted on this map are both, again, within the air range.
Yes, sir.
Same question for communication at 6:07 p.m. or 18:07. Both well, I guess I should clarify, this is Tower 849, Sector 1 at a distance of 2.52 miles, and again, we see that both the 401 Gale Avenue and 908 Saddle Creek Run locations are within the air range for that communication to that tower, correct?
Yes, sir.
Again, same thing for 6:10 p.m. Communicating with Tower 849 at a distance of 2.51 miles. Both locations are within the air range for the tower.
Yes, sir.
Again, at 6:19. Same thing. Both locations, 401 Gale Avenue and 908, are within the air range for Tower 847, Sector 1.
That's correct.
All right, 6:20 p.m. or 18:20. Again, we're at Tower 847, Sector 1, distance of 1.07 miles. Both locations are still consistent with the reported handset information.
That's correct.
16:25 or 8:25 p.m. Both locations are still consistent with the information reported for the handset.
Yes, sir.
6:33 p.m. This is again Tower 847, Sector 1 at a distance of 1.06 miles. Both locations are still consistent with the information provided for the handset.
Yes, sir.
'This is at 19:23 and 42 seconds. So this is 7:23, correct?
Yes, sir.
Tower 847, Sector 1, distance of 1.66 miles. We see in this one, it does not appear that that the Gale Avenue address is any longer within the air range for that tower, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So if he's at either of these locations, it's likely to be Brandy's house at this point, right?
That's correct.
And again, I know that's a big if. He could be anywhere within that arc, right?
That's true.
How about for 7:37 p.m., 847, Sector 1 at a distance of 1.6 miles?
Both
1.06 miles, sorry.
both locations are within the air range.
All right. And now even at 8:21 p.m., technically, I guess the 401 Gale Avenue address is still within the air range for the tower, right?
It is, though it's very close.
So in situations like this, where there are multiple relevant locations within the air range, can you make any, or render any opinion about where specifically the handset is?
I think it's problematic. I mean, that's the issue with the range-to-tower data anyway, is you have issues with just how accurate it is. And for any particular location to attempt to say, hey, yeah, that's where the phone was, I just don't think we have enough information.
So essentially you agree with Sergeant Corbett that either location could be the location for the handset
During any of those communications other than the one noted.
I can't exclude either one.
Okay. Do you also agree with Sergeant Corbett that the 408 handset, once it travels back down to Woodville and is communicating with the tower down in Woodville at 9:30, that handset never goes anywhere near Ms. Peters' house again that day?
That's correct.
Okay. And similarly, his 509 number never goes anywhere near her house either, correct?
Correct.
I have no further questions for the witness.
Yes, sir.
We'll get into the maps in just a second. Are you familiar with the basic scientific principle of conducting experiments?
I am.
Okay. What is that?
Essentially, you would develop a hypothesis, develop an experiment to then test that hypothesis and determine whether or not you have actually created a valid hypothesis based upon those tests.
And you utilize a control, right? With something that you can control and know what the functions are and things along those lines?
That's true.
Okay. In this particular case, when you're analyzing the cell phone data, you analyze the data that was there, correct?
That's true.
Didn't have a control.
The control would have been the TPD test calls.
Okay. So you would agree that that is in fact a control?
I think it's a control, albeit with its flaws.
Okay. And in conducting these experiments, you would agree with the principle that Tallahassee Police Department did in placing this phone where they said it was. Sergeant Corbett said it was.
I think it could have been there, yes.
Okay. It is in fact consistent with being at her home, right?
That's true.
Okay. Now, you're paid by the defense, right? You were hired by the defense?
Yes, sir.
And you were initially hired, when were you initially hired?
It's been a little while. I would have to say it was probably early in 2017.
Hired early in 2017?
Yes, sir.
And you were asked to go back and take a look at the information that was provided to defense regarding the cell phone information for accuracies, discrepancies, things along those lines, correct?
That's true.
And in making those findings, as you reported today, you can find no faults really with what Tallahassee Police Department found, correct?
I don't think my issue would be with the findings. I think it would be the limitations upon those findings and just how firmly you can agree to that conclusion.
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is we had a very limited sample size of approximately 60 phone calls off of the test device over a fairly short period of time. And while it gives us an idea that, yeah, that could be correct, it's really not enough to validate the actual phone calls in order to determine, hey, yeah, this is how that's going to react in every circumstance, particularly given some of the unpredictability of the cell tower networks.
Okay, but you just got through testifying that your findings are consistent with what Sergeant Corbett testified to, correct?
I think there are findings that are, the findings are correct, however, we have to acknowledge the limitations.
And that limitations is that that Gale Street address could also be included in this cone that you utilize, correct?
That's true, and we don't know for sure where the phone is at for range to tower distance when you've got those limitations to the test calls that were actually made.
Okay, but the test calls indicated what they did, and the data indicated what it was, and it was all consistent with being at Brandy Peters' home, correct?
Sure, in that limited testing, that's correct.
Okay, and you would have reported that back to defense, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But you would agree with me that when you did that reporting back to defense, that it certainly showed that he was not at 1098 Mustang Drive where he told law enforcement he was.
I don't know where he was at. All I can do is tell you where the phone is at, but I would agree that the phone was not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
Let's take a look here. In the afternoon, not at 1048 Mustang Drive.
Yes, sir.
1:54 in the afternoon, not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
1:12. I'm sorry, am I right? No, 2:12, excuse me. Not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
2:13, not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
That's true.
10:20, not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
2:27, not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
3:05, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
3:58, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
5 o'clock, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
5:45, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6 o'clock, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6:05, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6:07, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6:10, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6:19, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6:20, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
Got hung up here a little bit. 6:25, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
6:33, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
7:23, not at Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
7:23, consistent with 908 Saddle Creek Run.
That's true.
6:08, or, 7:23, when Mrs. Peters' phone stops communicating in an active way at 908 Saddle Creek Run,
Correct.
and not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
That's correct.
7:37, again, when Ms. Peters' phone is not communicating and not being used actively at 908 Saddle Creek Run and not at 1098 Mustang Drive.
And potentially at 401 Gale, but yes, that's correct.
And at 8:21, when Ms. Peters' phone is no longer communicating with any network in any way, shape, or form and never to be heard from again, not at 1098 Mustang Drive and consistent with Saddle Creek Run.
And potentially Gale Avenue, yes, sir.
So you would agree with me then, Mrs. Segura was there when Brandy at 908 Saddle Creek Run, when Ms. Peters' phone stopped communicating with the tower.
I would say the phone could potentially be there, yes, sir.
Redirect. This is probably a long, boring, and redundant way to say something very simple, which lawyers like me and Mr. Fuchs tend to do. You and Sergeant Corbett agree, you can't definitively say where the phone
Is at within the error arc during all of these communications, right?
That's correct.
The handset location could be consistent either with 401 Gale Avenue or 908, with the exception of the one at 737, I think it was, correct?
Correct.
723.
Yes, sir.
And at that time, we know Mr. Segura was at Ms. Peters' house because he's testified to that, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And again, with regard to Sergeant Corbett's testimony that the handset stayed down in Woodville for the rest of the night after it got back down there at 9:30, you agreed with that as well?
Yes, sir.
All right. So in this case, although there may have been some issues with the scientific methodology that they utilized to try and come up with an error range, it ended up not mattering because everybody agrees, all the experts agree, you and Sergeant Corbett, that neither location can be excluded for most of these communications.
That's correct.
Thank you. No further questions.
Did you ever have a question of this witness? All right, you can step down. Be a good place to break for the evening. Persuade y'all to go home. All right. Have a good evening. Don't talk with anybody about the case. Don't let anybody talk with you about the case. 8:45 tomorrow morning. See you.
We're about on pace, I think. We were going slow for a while, but I think I made up ground, and we'll still be on pace to finish either by the end of the day tomorrow or very early Friday. Mr. Fuchs has indicated he thinks he can finish up his rebuttal Friday as well, which should, he and I have been talking about it throughout the trial, and I think what we're both hoping for is that we'll be done with